Chapter 107. Welcome. It was obvious that this was the first time the two young ladies had heard this greeting. Their expressions froze, and a trace of astonishment appeared on their pretty faces. In a world that was filled with "Please come in. What would you like to eat? What would you like to order? And what would you like to order?" The words "welcome" from a pretty servant girl in a shop that they didn't know what it was selling was extremely refreshing and refined. The servant girl's attitude made them feel very comfortable. Just as they walked into the shop, their mood strangely became better. When they passed by the street earlier, they discovered that there was a new shop called Rui Square. They couldn't tell what it was selling from the shop's name, but the three words on the shop's signboard seemed to have the demeanor of a great family. It was very extraordinary, and compared to the other shops along the street, it was like a crane among a flock of chickens. This made the two ladies a little curious, and they couldn't help but walk in. However, this extraordinary servant girl was only secondary. When the two ladies raised their heads and looked into the shop, their delicate bodies couldn't help but tremble. One of the ladies even covered her small mouth and almost cried out. They saw that there were many paintings hanging on the walls of the shop. What was strange was that in these paintings, whether it was the mountains, rivers, or people, they all looked like they were about to break out of the paintings. At first glance, even a normal person would be shocked. First, it was the elegant calligraphy. Now it was the extremely strange paintings. This caused the two ladies' curiosity towards this shop to increase greatly. "Two misses, please sit." The servant girl's voice was gentle. The two ladies walked to the side of the table and chairs. No matter whether it was the floor or the chairs, they were all spotless. The moment they sat down, the servant girl had already brewed fragrant tea and stood quietly to the side. After walking into the shop, no matter if it was the environment or the servant girl's attitude, they all felt that it was just right. They didn't feel cold or annoyed. It was quiet and comfortable. There seemed to be a unique fragrance in the air that made people feel relaxed and happy. Following the scent, the two ladies' gazes quickly focused on a porcelain bottle on the table. "What is this?" Confusion appeared in the eyes of the two women as they looked at the servant girl. "This item is called Rui Dew. It's our shop's newest product. It has the effect of cooling, refreshing, repelling mosquitoes and relieving itching." A voice came from behind. The two girls turned around and saw a handsome young man walking out from behind the counter. He looked at them and said with a smile, "This young master is so handsome." Seeing the handsome young master with a jade-like face, the two women blushed slightly and thought to themselves, "May I ask, young master, how do I use this Rui Dew?" She didn't expect the shopkeeper to be such a handsome young master. A woman stood up and said with a faint smile. Lee opened the porcelain bottle on the table and introduced it to them. "When bathing or washing clothes, put a few drops of Rui Dew in it. It can cool down in summer and relieve itching in autumn. In addition, when washing every day, if you put a few drops of Rui Dew in the water, it can also reduce the possibility of getting sick." The greatest effect of floral water was actually not repelling mosquitoes, but its sterilization function. It was just that the ancients did not have the concept of bacteria, and their awareness of hygiene was far from comparable with modern times. Lee could only change to a popular explanation. The two women had personally felt the refreshing effect of Rui Dew. At this time, the woman who spoke just now asked again, "Young master said that this Rui Dew can repel mosquitoes, is it true?" "Miss, you can try it. If it is false, I am willing to pay you back double the original price," Lee said with a smile. He had personally tried the effect of floral water. Although the conditions were limited, and the effect could not be compared with the later generations, he was still very satisfied with the effect of repelling mosquitoes. When the woman heard the words, her face showed obvious interest. Since the beginning of autumn, mosquitoes were rampant. She would be bitten by mosquitoes almost every day. She did not know why. After the maids in the mansion were bitten, they would get a small bump and itch for a while. Whenever she was bitten, it would immediately become red and swollen. It was extremely itchy and unbearable. Many methods had been tried, but there was still not much effect. In addition, for women, it was their nature to love beauty. How could they let others see such an embarrassing appearance? They could only stay in the tent in the room all day, and even their mood became gloomy. Today's weather was fine, and she came out for a walk with her friends. She did not expect that there would be such a strange thing in a newly opened shop here. If what this young master said was true, no matter how high the price was, she would buy this ruidu at all costs. May I know the price of this ruidu? The woman looked up at Li Yi and asked. Whether this thing was useful or not, she still had to try it out. However, since he dared to say that just now, he must have great confidence in this thing. 1 tael of silver for each bottle. Li Yi had been observing this woman. Looking at her clothing, she seemed to be a young lady from a rich family. She shouldn't be scared away by this price, right? 1 tael of silver? The woman's expression froze when she heard this, as if she did not dare to believe it. This kind of strange thing was actually only selling for 1 tael of silver? Even a piece of jewelry that she usually wore would cost dozens to hundreds of taels. 1 tael of silver to her was really nothing. Seeing the shocked expression on her face, Li Yi thought that she was scared by the price. After thinking for a moment, he clenched his teeth and said, "Miss, you are the first customer since the opening of this shop. You can enjoy a half-price discount. You only need 5 taels of silver to take away a bottle of ruidu." The woman returned to her senses and said with a smile, 1 tael of silver is 1 tael of silver. If this thing is useless, I will come find you again tomorrow. The woman in front of him was obviously a fair, rich, and beautiful woman with strong principles. No matter what, she was not willing to pay half price. She took out 1 tael of silver from her purse and asked Li Yi again for instructions on how to use it. Then, she left the shop with the ruidu. After walking out of the shop, her close friend, who had been by her side and had not spoken, looked back into the shop. She turned her head and looked at her with a smile that was not a smile. She whispered, "What do you mean come find me tomorrow? Could it be that our Chen family's young lady has taken a fancy to that young man?" A trace of red appeared on the woman's pretty face. She glared at her friend. "You little girl, don't talk nonsense. If this ruidu doesn't have the effect that he said, I will naturally ask him for an explanation." An explanation? The woman beside her heard this and laughed mockingly. "I think it's more like asking for a husband. You damned girl, if you dare to talk nonsense again, see if I don't tear your mouth apart." I don't dare. I will teach you a lesson when we get back." The 2 figures gradually disappeared from the street. Inside the shop, Li Yi put away the tael of silver and let out a long sigh of relief. No matter what, this first bottle of ruidu was finally sold. Chapter 108. Reality was always crueler than ideal. After a whole day, he only sold 2 bottles of ruidu. If it wasn't for Li Yi decisively giving a 50% discount, when he saw that the young woman who entered the shop later was tempted, but was obviously hesitant about the price, he would only be able to make 1 sale today. This time, the god of luck didn't seem to be on his side. In both of his lives, he didn't do much business. He had read a lot of books on marketing, but when it came to real use, he still couldn't figure it out. In the afternoon, he thought of a problem. There were only 3 words Rui Workshop hanging there. People didn't know what this shop was doing, so he found a wooden board and erected it at the door. He clearly marked the effects and price of ruidu. After that, more people came into the shop. But when they heard that it would cost 1 tael of silver to buy such a small bottle of mosquito-repellent medicine, they immediately lost interest. For most of the ordinary people in the city, if they were bitten by mosquitoes, they would just spit and wipe it. 1 tael of silver could buy a lot of food. Wasn't it crazy to spend it on this? But there were a few people who asked Li Yi if he would sell the board at the door. It seemed that he admired the calligraphy on it, and even offered a price of 10 taels of silver. Of course, Li Yi didn't agree. Could it be that he could only rely on his talent to make a living? After a while, when he went out to take a look, the board was actually gone. After a while, he could only curse at the damn thief. Tomorrow, he would have to find a new board and nail it on the door. Inside the shop, the young servant girl held her chin with one hand and looked at the people coming and going outside. After a long time, a strange sound came from her stomach. Her pretty face slightly blushed. She turned her head to look at Li Yi and said softly, "Young master, I'm hungry." He hadn't eaten since morning. Even Li Yi felt a little hungry. He rubbed the young servant girl's head and said, "Okay, let's go out to eat first." Although the room at the back of the shop had been tidied up, and there was a small kitchen, Li Yi was not in the mood to cook for himself. He closed the shop door and ate his stomach with Xiao Huan at the noodle stall outside. Originally, he wanted to take the little maidservant to a high-class restaurant to eat something good, but the little maidservant was still thinking about the noodle stall on the street. In the end, the two of them only spent a few copper coins. After the meal, he didn't go back to the shop. There were some things that Li Yi had to think about at home. Every profession had its own unique way of doing things. Previously, he had taken it for granted. In the willow leaf stockade, while Li Yi was lying on his bed, digesting more books on business theory and sales knowledge, in a courtyard with high walls in Qing'an Prefecture, a charming young woman walked to the door of a room after taking a bath with a bowl of ginseng soup she had personally cooked. "Second madam." The two servants at the door greeted respectfully. "Is master asleep?" the woman asked softly. "No, master hasn't come back yet. He just sent someone to send in a new batch of official documents. They are still in the study," one of the servants replied in a low voice. The woman nodded, took the ginseng soup, and walked in a certain direction. In the study, the middle-aged man finished reading a file. He closed his eyes and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. There was a trace of exhaustion between his eyebrows. After a moment, he opened his eyes again and took another document. Before he opened it, the door of the study was pushed open. Hearing the sound, the middle-aged man frowned. What he hated the most when he was working was to be disturbed. If the servants didn't get his orders, they wouldn't dare to come in at this time. After reading the documents for a whole night, he felt dizzy and annoyed. He was about to scold them, but when he looked up and saw the person coming, his expression eased. "Madam, why aren't you resting?" He put down the document in his hand, walked over, took the tray from her hand, put it on the table and said softly, "His first wife died when he was young, so this was the only concubine left in the family. Normally, he was busy with official business, so this second madam always took care of everything in an orderly manner. She never caused him any trouble, so she could be considered a good wife. Master, you are busy with official business, but you still need to take care of your health. I made some ginseng soup for master. Master, drink it while it's hot. It won't be too late to read the documents later." The woman helped him straighten his collar and said with a smile, "Thank you for your hard work, madam." The middle-aged man held her hand and patted it. When he smelled the strange smell coming from her body, he couldn't help but feel shocked, but he didn't care. He drank a bowl of ginseng soup and said, "I still need some time to finish reading these documents. Madam, go rest first." The woman smiled and said, "I'm not tired. I'll stay here with master." The middle-aged man didn't say anything else. He picked up the document on the table again and began to seriously read it. The woman slowly walked to his back, stretched out her lily-white hands, and slowly massaged his shoulders. From time to time, he smelled a faint fragrance. The middle-aged man felt his spirit gradually rise, and the trace of tiredness from before was swept away. He couldn't help but speed up as he flipped through the documents. When he reached out his hand again, there were no more documents to take. The night watchman's voice came from outside the study. Only then did he discover that the document that usually took him 2 hours to read had actually taken him less than an hour. When he turned his head, he found that the woman had fallen asleep on the desk at some point in time. Quietly looking at her slightly tired brows, the middle-aged man's heart suddenly surged with a faint trace of guilt. Wasn't he neglecting her a little by devoting himself to his official duties? He took a thin blanket from the bed in the study and was about to cover her when the woman slowly opened her eyes. She got up and looked at him. She asked, "Master, have you finished reading the document?" "Madam, it's been hard on you all these years." The middle-aged man held her hand inside. He pulled her into his arms. "Master." She had never seen such a gentle side to him. The woman felt a lump in her throat, and tears almost fell. The husband and wife exchanged words of love for a while. The woman lay in the middle-aged man's arms and felt some changes in his body. Her pretty face suddenly became red. She said in a small voice, "Master, this is the study." A moment later, the middle-aged man held the woman in his arms behind the curtains of the study. He took a whiff of her scent and asked doubtfully, "What other perfume did Madame use tonight?" "After smelling it, your husband felt exceptionally spirited. Even the speed at which I dealt with the documents has increased." Fragrance. The woman was lying in his arms with a satisfied expression. She was stunned when she heard this. She said, "I didn't use any fragrance." Before she finished speaking, she suddenly remembered that when she was bathing at night, she had dropped a few drops of the Rouy Dew that she had bought on the street into the bathtub. Could it be because of this? Yes, that handsome shopkeeper seemed to have said that this Rouy Dew had the effect of refreshing the mind. Could it be that the master's unprecedented interest tonight was also because of this Rouy Dew? Chapter 109. For this woman, other than being able to refresh her mind, it was no longer important whether or not this Rouy Dew had the effect that she thought it had. Tonight, her master was in a great mood. It was rare for him to say so many intimate words to her. In an instant, she thought back to 10 years ago when he had just become a jeansure. However, because he was born into a poor family, he did not have any background. He could only become a small county magistrate in a remote place. Although his days were hard, his family was happy and harmonious. After experiencing 10 years of hard work in his official career, he was no longer a small 7th-ranked official. However, he was even busier in his work. Before today, her master had not touched her for several months. Tonight's happiness was completely beyond her expectations. The scholar did not seem to have explained the full effect of this Rouy Dew. The hidden effect was what she was most satisfied with. She only thought that tomorrow, she would definitely buy more Rouy Dew. Other than the effect, it would be of great help to her master's work. Temporarily putting aside this thought, a trace of red crept up her cheeks, and she took the initiative to greet him. The room was filled with love, causing the servant girl standing at the door of the study to blush. The next morning, when the woman walked out of the study, her face was abnormally rosy, and she looked much younger. The servant girl in the courtyard secretly looked at the woman. Thinking about the voice she heard at the door last night, a trace of red appeared on her pretty face again. "Shinger Tower, come over." The woman waved her hand, and the two pretty servant girls in the courtyard immediately trotted over. "What instructions does Madame have?" The beautiful woman opened her mouth and said, "The two of you, go to the accounts room, and take 20 taels of silver. Then go to the Rouy workshop we went to yesterday, and buy a batch of Rouy Dew." "Yes, madam, we will go now," the young servant girl responded, and did not delay in the direction of the accounts room. At the same time, in a deep courtyard on the other side of the prefecture city, a young servant girl knocked on the door of her young miss room. When she walked in, she saw her young miss sitting on the bed in a daze. Somewhat puzzled, she asked, "Young miss, what's wrong?" The woman returned to her senses and said, Go to the street and find a shop called Rouy Workshop and buy some Rouy Dew." "Young miss, what is Rouy Dew?" This was the first time the young servant girl had heard of this name, and a puzzled expression appeared on her face. "When you find that shop, you will naturally know." The woman got up from the bed and pointed at the toiletries in the hands of the young maidservant. She ordered, "Put those things down. The shop is in the East Market. It's next to the cloth shop that we went to a few days ago." "Yes, young miss, I will go immediately." Watching the young servant girl leave the room, the woman's eyes moved to a small porcelain bottle on the cabinet in front of the bed. A trace of joy appeared on her pretty face. Last night, she listened to the handsome young master's words, and when she took a bath, she dripped some of the Rouy Dew in. She did not know if she dripped too much, but she could not fall asleep when she lay on the bed. She simply got up and read a book. Later, she did not know when she fell asleep and forgot to open the curtain. If it was in the past, she would definitely be bitten by the autumn mosquitoes and suffer some pain. She did not expect that when she woke up this morning, her body would be fine. There were no signs of mosquito bites. At this moment, she naturally knew in her heart that the handsome young master from yesterday did not lie to her. The first thing she did when she woke up in the morning was to ask her personal servant girl to go to the auspicious Luck Lane and buy more auspicious dew. Even if she could not use it herself, It was not a bad idea to give it to her sisters. After the young servant girl left the mansion, she walked to the East Market in less than a quarter of an hour. She found the cloth shop that she had visited with the young miss a few days ago. When she looked at the side of the cloth shop, she finally saw the signboard that said Rui Workshop. A trace of joy appeared on her pretty face. Just as she was about to walk over, she suddenly stopped. The door of the shop was closed. Two young girls of the same age as her were standing at the door of the shop. They had a worried look on their faces and were whispering to each other. Why is it not open today? How are we going to explain this to the madam? There is nothing we can do. It is not our fault that the shop is closed. The madam will not blame us. Let's wait for another hour. If the shop is still not open, we will go back. As the young servant girl listened to their conversation, she could not help but feel curious. Could it be that she was not the only one who came to buy that ruido early in the morning? She wanted to see what this ruido was. The young servant girl thought to herself. She looked at the sky and the gradually bustling market. She could not help but mutter a few words. The shopkeeper of this shop is really lazy. The sun is already shining on his buttocks, but he still doesn't open for business. He will definitely not make any money. Ladies, are you here to buy cloth? The fat shopkeeper of the cloth shop next door asked eagerly when he saw the three young girls standing outside the door. We are not here to buy cloth. Uncle, do you know when this Rui workshop will open? One of the young girls looked at him and asked. Seeing that the three of them were not here to buy cloth, the fat shopkeeper lost his patience and said lazily, I don't know. Perhaps business is not good and they are closed. With that said, he strolled back into his shop. If it were not for the fact that the young girl at the door was extremely delicate, he would not even be interested in talking to her. Closed. The three girls looked at each other with bitter expressions on their faces. Inside the cloth shop, the shopkeeper sat lazily on a wooden armchair. His fat face was also full of doubts. Strange, I don't know what the shop next door is selling. There was not much business yesterday, why is today? In the Willow Leaf Village, Fong also had a bitter expression. His heart ached, but he still looked at Li Yi and comforted him. Young master, don't be sad. Didn't you say that failure is success? The business of ruido is not good, but we can still sell that liquor. Old Fong knew very well that for the sake of the ruido business, the son-in-law had built the workshop and rented the shop. He had invested almost all of his wealth into it. If he lost everything, he would definitely feel bad. In fact, Li Yi was not distressed about the money. In the time travel novels that he had read before, there was no lack of floral dew. But why was it that once the floral dew was sold, it immediately became popular all over the world and made a lot of money? But when it came to him, no one cared about it. Everyone was time traveling. Why couldn't he do it? Was he really not as good as others? This kind of blind self-esteem was the reason why he was in a dilemma at the moment. Chapter 110. No matter what, he had spent a lot of effort on the Rui nectar. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Li Yi would not give up easily. Last night, he had already thought of a few marketing strategies. If it didn't work, he could find a few shills and create hype. Of course, whether these methods would work or not, he would only know after trying it out. After breakfast, he went down the mountain and returned to the prefecture city. This time he didn't let Xiaohuan follow. However, Fong was worried and had to follow to take a look. He didn't know what the situation was like in the shop, so he didn't feel at ease staying in the stockade. At the entrance of the Rui workshop, there were only two young maidservants left. After waiting for more than an hour, the young maidservant lost her patience. Looks like the shop won't be open in the morning. The two maidservants looked at the sky and saw that it was almost noon. They shook their heads and said, although they couldn't buy the Rui nectar and couldn't report back, it wasn't their fault that the shop wasn't open. They would come back tomorrow. The two of them came to an agreement and were about to leave when they saw a familiar figure walking towards them from the other side of the street. Isn't that the shopkeeper we saw yesterday? One of the maidservants said in surprise. Yes, that's the young master. The other young maidservant immediately said. Yesterday, when they accompanied their madam to buy rouge and face powder on the streets, they accidentally discovered a newly opened shop. Out of curiosity, they walked in. The two maidservants didn't have a deep impression of this shop, but the handsome shopkeeper in the shop made them remember him. Since this young master had arrived, the prosperity lane should be open for business soon. The two servant girls felt a trace of joy in their hearts. They were glad that they did not leave too early. Lee didn't notice the two young maidservants at the entrance of the shop. He was thinking about something else. When he opened the door and saw the two young maidservants walking in behind him, he finally realized something. These two young maidservants were here to buy the ruby nectar. One of the young maidservants looked up at him and said in a clear voice. Fong, who was following behind, walked into the shop and saw the scene in front of him. His expression was a little stunned. Didn't the young master say that the business of the ruby nectar wasn't good, and no one bought it? What was going on? These two maidservants seemed to have been waiting at the entrance for a long time. They were actually here to buy the ruby nectar? Lee just realized that the two maidservants in front of him looked a little familiar. After some thought, he remembered that the woman who bought the ruby nectar yesterday had two maidservants with her. Weren't they the two in front of him? It was gratifying to have a repeat customer on the second day of the shop's opening. At the very least, it meant that the problem did not lie with the ruby dew. It was just his sales method that was wrong. Lee took a porcelain bottle from the shelf and handed it over. The young maidservant shook her head when she saw this. She took out 2 ingots of silver and placed them on the counter. She said, "There are 20 taels of silver here. Use it all to buy the ruby nectar." Fong stood at the side and stared blankly at the two rich and overbearing maidservants. He couldn't wrap his head around the situation. It hadn't been long since the shop opened, and there were already 20 taels of silver in the account. If this was considered bad business, then what was considered good business? Even Lee didn't expect that the two young maidservants would ask for so much. The first batch of ruby nectar looked like there were only 20 or so bottles. There had to be a few bottles left at home. After selling 2 bottles yesterday, there were only about 20 bottles left in the shop. However, he certainly wouldn't refuse to earn money. There were still 22 bottles of ruby nectar left in the shop. The 20 taels of silver were all sold to the two young maidservants. The 2 extra bottles were given to them as gifts. It wasn't convenient for the two of them to carry around more than 20 bottles of ruby nectar. Lee found a wooden box and put them away. He watched the two young maidservants leave the shop with satisfaction. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. So much ruby nectar, how long would it take to use it? Of course, Lee didn't know that the woman had already pinned her hopes for a long period of sexual happiness on these small porcelain bottles. Naturally, she had to store some first. Son-in-law, didn't you say that the shop's business wasn't good? Fong turned to look at him with a dull gaze. If the ruby nectar could be sold at this speed, then why would he sell candied fruits? He could just sit at home and count the money. Why would he need to go through so much trouble? Lee sighed and looked at Fong. He slowly said, "How many times have I told you? You have to take a long-term view. Do you understand long-term? This is only a mere 20 taels of silver. In the future we will make a lot of money. Don't always be satisfied with the current situation. This is just a small step for us." Fong's face showed respect. Son-in-law was indeed a son-in-law. If it was him, he wouldn't be able to keep his composure after earning 20 taels of silver so easily. "Excuse me, do you sell ruby nectar here?" A weak voice sounded from the door. A 15 or 16-year-old maidservant walked into the shop. The first person she saw was a burly man. She couldn't help but feel a little timid and asked in a low voice, "I'm sorry, today's ruby nectar is sold out." Lee felt strange. Yesterday, no one was interested in ruby nectar. Why did everyone come running here today? Then what should I do? The maidservant revealed a bitter expression. Just now, when the door of the shop didn't open, she got bored waiting and strolled around the street. She didn't expect that when she came back, the ruby nectar was already sold out. "How about this? You can pay half of the deposit first. When we have new stock tomorrow, we will keep it for you. You can come back tomorrow morning to collect it." Lee looked at her and said. The maidservant thought about it and could only nod in agreement. She wasn't afraid that they would take the deposit and run away. After all, their shop was here. In the prefectural city, Cheating people of deposits was very rare. Then, I want 10 bottles. I'll give you 5 taels of silver. The maidservant took out 5 taels of silver from her pouch and raised her head. What a few bottles! Fong's eyes widened as he saw the maidservant put the silver on the counter indifferently. He was surprised. Were all the people in the prefectural city so rich? Li didn't have time to accompany Fong in a daze. He took the deposit and wrote on a piece of paper, 10 bottles of floral water, 5 taels of deposit paid. He signed his name in the lower right corner and handed it to the maidservant. After several embarrassing scenes, Li felt that the unique handwriting of his previous life was better appreciated by him alone. When writing on the paper, he used Wang Shiji's semi-cursive script, which was the only one in the world. The signature was similar to the artistic calligraphy of later generations, so he wasn't afraid that someone would take it and imitate it. The maidservant put away the paper and looked up at the handsome shopkeeper's face. She vaguely felt that it was a little familiar. With doubts in her heart, she walked out of the shop. "Young master, what should we do now?" Fong looked at Li excitedly and asked. Li glanced at him and said with some annoyance, "What else can we do? Of course, increase production." Just when they closed the shop and planned to go back to the stockade, the maidservant had already returned home. The moment she stepped through the door, there seemed to be a flash of light in her mind. That young master just now seems to be. In the maidservant's mind, she couldn't help but think of a certain night not long ago. In the Mianxiu garden, at the mid-autumn poetry meet, she went to invite that scholar under the instruction of her mistress, and fought with other maidservants until her face turned red. Chapter 111. At this moment, in a garden in the inner courtyard of the mansion, a few young women were gathered together and whispering, "That Ruidu, is it really that magical?" The Chen girl told them what happened last night, and the woman next to her asked in disbelief. The other woman said, "Yuning is probably exaggerating. Ever since autumn, mosquitoes have been rampant, and we've tried all kinds of methods. Why haven't we heard of this Ruidu?" For women, rampant mosquitoes were really annoying after autumn. A few close friends were talking, and the woman called Chen Yuning mentioned a strange thing called Ruidu that they had never heard of before. This piqued their curiosity. Is that thing really as good as the shopkeeper said? The woman who went out with the Chen girl yesterday looked at her with surprise and asked, "Whether it's useful or not, you'll know after you try it." Chen Yuning didn't explain much. She turned around and said with confusion, "What's wrong with Xiu'er today? She's gone for so long. Why isn't she back yet?" Just as she was thinking about it, the figure of her personal servant girl finally appeared in her line of sight. Seeing the servant girl walk over empty-handed, a confused expression appeared on her face, and she asked, "Where's the thing I told you to buy?" The servant girl had a bitter expression and said innocently, "Miss, when I found the Rui workshop, the shopkeeper said that Ruidu was sold out, but I already told them that they will keep the Ruidu for us tomorrow. At that time Xiu'er can go get it." The Chen girl looked at her suspiciously and asked, "How could it be sold out so early? Honestly, did you just slack off and go shopping?" The servant girl couldn't help but feel a bit guilty after being seen through so quickly. She quickly changed the topic and said, "That's right, miss. I went to the Rui workshop today and found something else." "What is it?" The servant girl's trick was indeed effective. The Chen girl was curious, and she asked with some confusion. The surrounding women were clearly interested in this matter as well, and they all turned to look at the young servant girl. Thinking of that incident, the servant girl was still a little surprised and said, "The shopkeeper of the Rui workshop seems to be Li." "Li? Which Li?" Hearing this, the woman surnamed Chen became even more curious in her heart. "Li, the shopkeeper of Rui Square. What's going on?" The reactions of the surrounding women seemed to be even more intense than hers, all of them revealing expressions of curiosity. "Lily, could it be that our eldest daughter of the Chen family has finally fallen in love with the mundane world?" Hearing their nonsense, the girl surnamed Chen glared at them. She then looked at the young maidservant and asked, "Why are you beating around the bush? Tell me, what's going on with this Li guy?" Hearing this, the young servant girl said with some grievance, It's the Lee that Miss asked me to invite to the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet. Miss, have you forgotten? She secretly complained in her heart. Miss is really heartless. That day, she clearly liked Lee very much. How long has it been? And now she doesn't even remember what he looks like. Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet banquet? The expression on the pretty face of the girl surnamed Chen froze. And then she seemed to remember something. She asked with some surprise, "You mean that, Lee?" At the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet, she had sent Xiu'er to invite only one scholar. Naturally, she quickly remembered. Could it be that the handsome gentleman she saw yesterday was the Li Yi from the Immortal at the Magpie Bridge, and Shuidiaogetu? On the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, although she was shocked by Li's talent, she really didn't see his face. She only heard the people around her say that Li was both talented and good-looking. There were few scholars in Qing'an Prefecture who could compare. She was still regretful that she hadn't seen his face. She didn't think that yesterday at the Rui Lane. She didn't recognize that Li when she saw him. What Li? Who is Li? Yes, tell us quickly, don't keep us in suspense. Seeing the expression on Chen Yuning's face, the surrounding girls were even more confused. Their hearts were stifled, and they all asked questions. It's that Li Yi from Shuidiaogetu, Li. The young servant girl looked at them, and said with some confusion. In her heart she was curious. What was wrong with them? A few days ago, they kept talking about that Li and read his poems all day long. Why did they all seem to have amnesia? It looked like the young ladies of these large families were all fickle people. As she thought this, when she looked at the other young ladies again, the young servant girl couldn't help but be startled. She was so frightened by the light in their eyes that she took several steps back. Next to the Rui Lane, the owner of the cloth shop slowly walked out of his shop and looked at the shop opposite. In the past 2 days, he had done this action countless times. He didn't know when, but the door that had been closed for a day had been opened. It had to be said that the shop opposite was really strange. It had only been open for a day the day before yesterday, and had been open for a little less than an hour yesterday. After that, he hadn't seen the shopkeeper appear again. Could it be that because business wasn't good he gave up? The more the fat shopkeeper thought about it, the more likely it seemed. That shopkeeper looked more like a scholar than a businessman. He opened the shop but didn't advertise. Customers didn't even know what was sold inside. How could there be business? The rent for this shop probably cost 1 tael of silver a day. No business meant a loss. He wanted to see how long this shop could stay open for. When this shop really couldn't stay open any longer, he could talk to the scholar, and perhaps he could rent it out at a low price. At that time, the cloth shop could expand. Presumably business would be better. If business was better, he could consider opening a few more shops and hire a few more workers. He could retreat behind the scenes and count his silver. If he could become the largest cloth merchant in Qing, a prefectural city in his lifetime, he would have no regrets in this life. Not far away, a dozen or so women walked in this direction in a group. The fat shopkeeper saw clearly that these women were coming in the direction of the cloth shop. A smile immediately appeared on his face. So many customers had come early in the morning. The cloth shop's business was booming. He would talk to the scholar tomorrow. If he was willing to sell this shop, the price could be discussed. This way, he would be one step closer to his dream. Thinking of this, the smile on the fat shopkeeper's face became even more radiant. Chapter 112. Ladies, come in and have a look. Our shop just got a new batch yesterday. The fat shopkeeper greeted them with a smile. He watched these women walk past him and stop in front of the shop next door. The fat shopkeeper had already made an inviting gesture. The smile on his face froze. He stood there stupidly, like a statue standing in the autumn morning breeze. This is Rui Workshop? The group of women stood at the entrance of the shop, and when they saw the 3 words on the signboard, a few of them immediately revealed shocked expressions. Flowing like the clouds and flowing water, lively and lively, just like a swimming dragon. The style of these 3 words is already unique, but I've never heard of it before. Could it be that young Master Li created it himself? Hearing this, a woman asked doubtfully, but didn't they all say that Li's literary talent is brilliant, but his calligraphy is unsightly? It's just a rumor. It may not be credible. Another woman curled her lips and said, Scholars have always despised each other. They are jealous of Li's talent, so it's not strange for them to belittle him. Several women discussed in a low voice at the door. Suddenly, one of them turned around and looked at the figure standing stiffly in the wind. She asked doubtfully, "What happened to him?" "A new batch of new goods." The owner of the cloth shop said what he didn't finish just now in a daze. In the autumn wind, only the sound of heartbreak could be heard. Inside the shop, Li had just put the new batch of ruidu that he had rushed to make yesterday on the counter. He was planning how to promote it after today. In the past 2 days, he had crammed some knowledge about business and sales. Now he was no longer as ignorant as he used to be. Ruidu was a new thing that had never been seen before in this world. It was not easy for people here to accept it. There was a sound at the door. Li turned his head and saw the girl who had paid the deposit yesterday coming in from outside. She should be here to take the ruidu. He stood up from his seat. Just as he took a step forward, he was stunned on the spot before he could speak. Looking at the sudden appearance of more than a dozen women in the shop and their eager eyes, Li's heart trembled. He suddenly felt like a sheep entering a pack of wolves. What's going on? Could it be they are going to rob me? It's over. Li felt some regret. If he had known that the security in Qing Prefecture was so bad, he should have brought Fang here today. It didn't seem like a good idea. Fang could handle several men at once. As for women, thinking of his cowardly manner in front of his wife, it was very likely that he couldn't handle such a big scene. If only Rui was here. At the very least, he wouldn't be in such a passive position. While Li was observing these women, they were also observing him. This young Master Li, the shopkeeper, is indeed a man of striking appearance. A certain lady's beautiful eyes shone with anticipation. It's him, it's him, it's him. A talented woman who had seen him at the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet felt her heart beating wildly. So he's young Master Li. I didn't recognize him yesterday and lost the initiative. What a pity, what a pity. The woman surnamed Chen sighed, and her heart was filled with regret. Young master, don't be alarmed. We are here to buy Rui nectar. A woman walked up and said with a smile. Young master, there's no need to panic. We're here to buy Rui dew. A woman walked up and said with a smile. Her words were half-truths. Even though buying the Rui nectar was one of her goals, the most important thing was to meet this legendary talent. Of course, after the previous incident, they didn't dare to be too enthusiastic. If he flew away like last time, where would they go to find him? Young master, don't be alarmed. We are here to buy Rui nectar. These words made Li uncomfortable. Who was alarmed? Which eye of theirs saw him alarmed? He was clearly very calm all the time, okay? He put down the teapot with one hand and moved the other hand away from the abacus. His expression calmed down, and a smile returned on his face. Miss, this way please. He led the women to the counter where the Rui nectar was placed, and began to introduce it to them carefully. Early in the morning, there were so many people here to buy Rui nectar. This was beyond his expectations. It seemed that as long as the item was good, he didn't have to worry about not being able to sell it. Among these women, there was a woman he had seen 2 days ago. She was the first customer of the shop. It seemed that she had actively advertised the shop. He would give her a cost price later to show his gratitude. Li didn't know that for these women, Rui nectar was only secondary. The main reason was that they were here to meet the elusive #1 scholar of Qing Prefecture, or perhaps the #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom. As these women listened to his introduction, their gazes swept across the shop. Very quickly, they were attracted by the paintings hanging on the walls. Among them, they were either young ladies of wealthy families or talented women of some renown in Qing Prefecture. They had received a good education from a young age and knew at least a little bit about poetry and painting. Although the many paintings in front of them were average in terms of meticulous brushwork and did not stand out, they looked so real. They had never seen anything like this in their lives. Thinking about the other person's identity, they more or less understood that he must have taken a different path and walked out of the traditional pattern of painting. It was rare to see someone with this kind of spirit and courage among the many scholars of Qing Prefecture. Most people in the prefectural city probably thought that Li of Shuidiaogetu was only good at poetry. They didn't know that his skill in painting had already reached a higher level, and his calligraphy had truly entered the realm of a grandmaster. It was laughable that those people had spread rumors that Lee wasn't good at calligraphy. They didn't know that just the 3 words Rui Workshop was enough to shut everyone's mouths. But there was one thing they couldn't understand. Since he had such talent, why didn't he pursue an official career, and instead chose to be a small shopkeeper here? Could it be that at such a young age, he had already seen through all this, and was a reclusive genius? With this doubt in their hearts, their interest in him grew. At the side, Li Yi's mouth was dry from talking. He turned his head to look at these women, and found that they were all looking around, clearly not paying attention. He couldn't help but feel a little depressed. Were these women really here to buy Ruidu? Could it be that they were sent by other shops to cause trouble? Luckily, these women didn't disappoint Li Yi. After a while he bought 1 bottle and I bought 2. If you bought 3 bottles I bought 4. If you bought 5 bottles I bought 10. Very quickly, the Ruidu that they had rushed to make yesterday was all sold out again. Ladies, if you think this Ruidu is useful, you might as well introduce it to your acquaintances. If you buy more than 20 bottles at one time, you can give me another 2 bottles for free. Seeing these women taking out silver from their purses without even batting an eyelid, Li Yi immediately realized that these were the true customers of the Ruidu. So he said with a smile on his face, all right. For young ladies like them, which of them didn't have a few close friends in their boudoir? Just like that, the rumors spread from 1 to 10 to 100. Once they opened up a sales channel in this circle, everything else would follow naturally. Their publicity was naturally much better than hiring people to advertise on the street. Of course, this Ruidu is very beneficial to women like us. Even if you don't say it, we will tell other sisters. A woman smiled sweetly and said, it's getting late. We won't disturb Lee's business anymore. We will leave first. Ladies, goodbye. Welcome to come again next time. Li Yi stood at the door of the shop and waved goodbye with a smile on his face. They took the initiative to advertise for him. These women were all good people. After a moment, a puzzled expression suddenly appeared on his face. That's not right. How did they know my surname is Li? Beside him, a shop away, the fat boss of the cloth shop looked at him with a big face full of envy. Chapter 113. Li Yi thought hard for a long time to come up with a marketing strategy, but he didn't use it after all. In the last few days, the number of customers in Rui Workshop suddenly increased. Every day before noon, the Ruidu produced in a hurry the day before was sold out. Most of the customers were women, and their clothes and temperament were all extraordinary. They didn't look like ordinary people. From this point of view, those women were really trustworthy, and he didn't waste the 10% discount he gave them. The only thing he couldn't stand was that some women looked at him in a strange way after entering the store. Every time he thought about it, he got goosebumps. Apart from that, there were also some elegant scholars who bought the Ruidu. Scholars who studied all day would inevitably feel dizzy. There were only a few people who could lift their heads and prick their buttocks to keep their spirits up. And they were the ones who didn't have the money to buy the Ruidu. For those rich scholars, they could spend 1 tael of silver to buy a bottle of Ruidu. When they were tired from reading, they could drop a few drops and instantly feel energetic. Their recitation efficiency would skyrocket. It was as if God was helping them. Of course, they wouldn't feel bad about spending 1 tael of silver. Fong's smile never disappeared from his face. The number of customers increased day by day. According to the current situation, the market should be far from saturated. Li Yi did not take the opportunity to rush the production and pass off shoddy goods as quality goods. Before he ran out of money, it was more important to build up his reputation. This was only the first product launched by Rui Lane. Only by building up his reputation could he earn more money in the future. Of course, the rarer something is, the more expensive it is. If Ruidu was as abundant as plain water, only a fool would spend 1 tael of silver to buy it. With the increase of customers, Li Yi and Xiao Huan were obviously too busy to take care of all the customers at the same time. For the past 2 days, he had been thinking in his heart whether he should recruit more people or not. The business of Rui's workshop was already on the right track. If he had to do all the small things himself, it would go against his original intention. Making money was only for the sake of accumulating original capital and using the fastest time to embark on the path of retirement. In order to make money, he had to wake up earlier than the chickens and sleep later than the dogs. He had never been so tired in his previous life. It was not worth it. Rui Workshop's business was booming. Every day before noon, it would be sold out and closed for the day. Naturally, it attracted the attention of many people. Of course, the people who felt it the most were the surrounding shops. One was as crowded as a marketplace, while the other was completely deserted. After asking around, they found out that the newly opened shop was selling a small bottle of Rui nectar for 1 tael of silver. What was even more surprising was that there were actually so many people who went to buy it. As for the effects of the Rui dew, they had also seen it from the signboard at the entrance. Wasn't slapping myself twice more effective than the Rui dew? It repels mosquitoes and relieves the itch. What's wrong with being bitten twice by mosquitoes? You're actually spending a tael of silver to buy this thing. Prevents diseases. Nonsense. What kind of panacea do you think you're selling? However, after hearing about it, they only curled their lips and felt that no one would buy it. Just like that, it successfully squeezed into the circle of Qing and Prefecture socialites. It became the new favorite of the young ladies of Qing and Prefecture. Even the scholars of Qing and Prefecture held it in high esteem. This caused the business of Rui Workshop to flourish day by day. Of course, this was not without its disadvantages. After all, the customers who came out of the shop would sometimes walk around the surrounding shops and buy things when they were in a good mood. This caused their business to increase. Their profits increased by more than 10%. Regarding this, the shopkeepers felt extremely complicated. They didn't know whether they should be happy or worried. At noon, the sun had not yet risen above their heads. In Rui Workshop, Li had already sold the last bottle of Rui dew. At the entrance of the shop, he hung a sold-out today sign. He sat on a chair tiredly. Xiao Huan walked over from the side and placed her small hand on his shoulder, gently massaging it. His eyes stared ahead in a daze, as if he had a lot on his mind. When the first girl secretly gave him the handkerchief embroidered with mandarin ducks and immortals of the Magpie Bridge, Li realized that something was wrong. Later, he saw a few girls secretly fighting over an order that he had personally written. The board on the door was stolen by someone in the middle of the night. It was replaced with a new one, and within 2 days it was stolen again. At this time, he finally understood that he had most likely been exposed. The spread of immortals of the Magpie Bridge was purely accidental. As for Shui Diaogetu, it was purely forced by that Xinjiao. He had not the slightest bit of precaution, and had inexplicably become so popular. Li expressed his innocence. He only wanted to do a small business. He didn't want to become some #1 scholar. Compared to this title, it was more practical to give him a few hundred taels of silver. He was half happy and half worried. Although his peaceful life had been disturbed, it wasn't completely without benefits. The booming business of Rui Workshop was most likely due to the fame brought about by the 2 poems. After all, in this world, the effect of a scholar was equivalent to the effect of a celebrity in the future. If Yang Yenzhou held a small porcelain bottle and said a few lines, "Rui nectar, women say it's good after using it," and put up such an advertisement, perhaps even the Dorzil of this place would be trampled to pieces by the women who admired him. Of course, with Li Yi's current fame, if he personally stood up to promote Rui Workshop, the effect would probably be even better. Then he would throw out a few famous poems, famous paintings from past dynasties, and a copy of Wang Shiji's preface to the Orchid Pavilion. He would hang them on the wall. Anyone who wanted to enter the shop would have to pay 1 tael of silver. Never underestimate the temptation of these things to scholars. Although this was extremely vulgar, Li did not doubt that there would still be countless people flocking to the shop. Up until now, earning money was still his main goal in life. However, Li could not accept this kind of immoral way of earning money with a clear conscience for the time being. The most difficult and stressful period had passed. The shop's business should be stable for a while. Li also finally let out a sigh of relief. It was time to give himself a break and relax. The little servant girl stood behind Li. The strength of her hand was gentle. She could see that the son-in-law was thinking about something. She slowed down her breathing and tried not to make a sound. However, the smile on the corner of her mouth could not be concealed. The matters of Rui workshop had always been handled by her and Li. When she thought of something, her eyes turned into crescent moons. These days, son-in-law has earned a lot of money. Chapter 114. In less than half a day, the new batch of Rui nectar was sold out again. Even the prepaid order was 7 days later. Li closed the shop as usual and went back to the stockade village with the little maid. Not long after, a carriage left the shop. After driving out of the mansion, it went straight along the official road. After a little more than 15 minutes, it arrived at the foot of Green Willow Mountain. If they didn't continue along the official road, it would be a rugged mountain road. The carriage would be difficult to travel. The young coachman jumped off the carriage, turned around and said loudly, "Sir, we've arrived." The curtain of the carriage opened. Li took Xiaohuan's hand and got off the carriage. He took out 10 copper coins from his waist and handed it to the coachman. He said, "Tomorrow is the same time. Remember to wait here." "Okay." The coachman put away the copper coins and said with a silly smile, "Sir, don't worry. I will wait here for you tomorrow morning. I won't delay your business." For this coachman, the young master in front of him was already a regular customer. The business of the carriage shop was not very good. He was naturally satisfied with a stable customer who would rent a carriage twice a day. Li waved his hand and watched the coachman drive away. He walked towards the stockade village with the little maid. Between Willow Leaf Village and Qing'an Prefecture, except for this section of mountain road, there were mostly flat roads that could be used by carriages. Renting a carriage could save more than half of the time compared to walking. Although the carriage was a little bumpy on the official road, after leaving the prefectural city, it was not too violent. Since Li knew that there was such a business as driving a carriage in the prefectural city, he often used this means of transportation. For ordinary people, in order to save 10 copper coins, they would rather choose to walk. But now the business of Rui workshop was so good that he could earn dozens of silver coins every day. He didn't need to save money in these places. What's more, the time saved was enough for him to create more than 10 copper coins. After walking on the mountain road for less than an hour, they could see the stockade village. Not long after entering the stockade village, they saw Fong surrounded by a few girls. He looked embarrassed and didn't know what happened. Today, Fong was the most successful man in the Willow Leaf Village, except for Li. He was envied by countless people. Li was a lazy person. After the business of the candied haws and the workshop went on the right track, he completely let go and let Fong take charge. Now, even the direct descendants of the Liu family had to act according to Fong's wishes. In the eyes of others, he was naturally awe-inspiring. More than once, Li had seen several women gathered together and talked about how much virtue Fong's wife had accumulated in her previous life to be able to marry such a capable man. Their words were full of admiration for Fong, just like an older fangirl. Of course, Li had never mentioned this to Fong. He did not want him to get carried away and harm a married woman. He did not want to cause a tragedy and destroy the harmony and stability of the stronghold. However, this was only limited to those women. When would these girls also? This made Li a little hard to imagine. Did he really underestimate Fong's charm before? "Uncle Fong, please help us." The girls looked at Fong and begged. Fong was never good at dealing with women. Being surrounded by so many girls, he could not help but feel a headache. He said with an embarrassed face, "It's not that I don't want to help you, but there is no shortage of people in the candied haws factory. You can't help much even if you go there. The work in the workshop is not something that you girls can do. We have nothing to do at home all day. Uncle Fong, please help us. There are many things we can do." "Yes, Uncle Fong, I beg you." Only Uncle Fong could help them with this matter. The girls did not give up and continued to beg. When the voices entered his ears, Fong felt a headache again. He glanced around and suddenly saw a familiar figure walking towards him. As if he had been granted amnesty, he immediately strode over. "Son-in-law, you're back." "Brother-in-law." Seeing Li Yi, the girls also bowed in a reserved manner. "What's going on?" Li Yi looked at Fong and asked with some doubt. "These children don't want to stay in the village. They insisted that I find some work for them." Fong looked at Li Yi and said helplessly, "There is no shortage of people in the candied Ha's factory. As for the workshop, as you know, son-in-law." Li Yi nodded. After the direct descendants of the Liu family joined, the candied Ha's business had reached a saturation point. As for the workshop, no one was allowed to go near it on normal days. The biggest reason was confidentiality. Another reason was because of safety issues. The workshop involved alcohol and fire, so it was not suitable for these women. In my opinion, women should stay in the village, cook, and take care of the house. It's really not suitable for them to go out and show their faces. Fong looked up at Li Yi and asked, "Son-in-law, don't you think so?" When the girls beside Fong heard this, a look of disappointment appeared on their pretty faces. They could not help but lower their heads. Uncle Fong was right. As women, especially unmarried women, they should be respectful and not show their faces in public. However, their parents were busy at home. Even Sister Qin Qing was teaching the children in the school. It seemed that everyone had something to do, but they were the only ones idling around at home. Naturally, they did not feel good about it. Li Yi glanced at Fong. For these girls to make such a request, they were much more ambitious than Fong. He turned to look at them and said with a smile, "It just so happens that Rui Workshop has been very busy recently. If you are willing, you can go there and help out." "Son-in-law, this." Fong looked up at Li Yi with a face full of surprise. "Really?" The girls looked up with the same look of disbelief. Li Yi nodded and said, "The shops in the prefectural city have been very busy recently. You can go to the shops tomorrow, after you pack up today." He did not expect these girls to have such intentions. However, he had already planned to hire people. These girls were his people and could be trusted. Instead of hiring a few outsiders, it was better to let them go. "Thank you, brother-in-law." The girls were overjoyed. Their pretty faces immediately bloomed with smiles as they quickly thanked him. "Of course, this matter must first be approved by your families." Seeing their excited expressions, Li Yi added. One of the girls smiled and said, "Don't worry, brother-in-law. They have already agreed." Since their families had agreed, Li Yi naturally did not have any objections. He went to the workshop to take a look and instructed Fong and the rest to hurry up with the production of the new batch of Ruidu. Previously, he did not expect that the Ruidu would be in such short supply. When the funds were sufficient and they could start producing spirits, such a small workshop would not be able to meet the production requirements. By that time, even the manpower would be insufficient. Chapter 115. After returning to the stockade village, he first went to the workshop that made Rui's nectar. The autumn weather was a bit chilly, but in the workshop, several men topless were working in full swing. Although their daily work was very simple, they obviously didn't feel bored and were full of energy at all times. It was no wonder. What they did here was not tiring work. It was much easier than herding horses or doing farm work. Not only that, they had meat to eat and wine to drink every day. At night, they could sit on the Kong with their wives and count the money. After counting the money, they would hide it. When they were in the mood, they could do something shameless. Life was very comfortable. Li Yi stood outside the workshop and looked at it from afar. Everything was normal, so he turned around and walked in the direction of his home. When he reached the door, he smelled a faint aroma of food before he stepped into the yard. Xiao Huan went to the shop with him in the morning, so it was naturally not her cooking. Mississippi Lu. Not to mention that she didn't know how to cook. Even if she did, Li Yi might not dare to eat it. In the past, it was Xiao Huan or himself who cooked, so Li Yi subconsciously thought that the two sisters didn't know how to cook. It was not until a few days ago that he found out that Rui also had extraordinary cooking skills. Even Xiao Huan, who had learned some of his skills, couldn't compare. Later, it was Xiao Huan who told him that before the old master left, when Xiao Huan and second miss were young, it was always the eldest miss who cooked. Xiao Huan learned most of her cooking skills from her. If it was in the future, she would probably be the kind of girl who was good-tempered, had extraordinary cooking skills, and had a black belt in Taekwondo. She would be the goddess in the hearts of countless men. And of course, she was also the ideal type for Li Yi. But at that time he couldn't be more ordinary. This kind of goddess-like girl probably wouldn't even look him in the eye. Now that he thought about it, in his previous life, he often gave up his seat to old people on the bus, occasionally helped old grannies cross the road, and was willing to help others without pocketing the money he picked up. In the end, there were rewards. "My husband, you're back. After you've washed your hands, come and eat." As soon as Li Yi stepped into the courtyard, he heard a gentle voice. After living together for so long, Lu Rui was no longer surprised by Li Yi's habit of washing his hands before eating. Recently, Li Yi came back around this time every day. By the time he reached home, the meal was already prepared. The feeling of always having someone waiting for him at home was very good. Not far away, Xiao Huan had already taken the initiative to fetch water for him. An imperceptible smile appeared on Li Yi's face as he strode over. "Brother Qian, you seem to be in a hurry. Where are you going?" "Rui Square." Rui Place sounds unfamiliar. Could it be a new brothel in the prefecture? "Brother Qian, you're not being honest. Why didn't you call little brother over for such a good thing? Why don't we go together? We can see for ourselves what kind of girls from Rui Place are like." On the streets of Qing and prefecture, Fong heard the conversation between two scholarly men. He pursed his lips and muttered, "I was right, wasn't I? This is obviously the name of a brothel. Second mistress still doesn't believe me." Li Yi glanced at Fong. This fellow had righteously told him that other than Rui Place, nothing else was suitable for the name of the shop. The few of them had rejected his suggestion of Six Spirits Place. Their opinions were unanimous. He had no choice but to name the shop Rui Place. If it had been called Six Spirits Place, there would not have been so many misunderstandings, right? Of course, the name Rui Place was not without its merits. At least, it could attract a large group of men who did not know the truth. Li Yi was extremely suspicious that the scholars who bought the Rui necklaces only had the same intentions as what the scholar had said. Behind the two of them, the faces of the four young girls were filled with excitement. They usually stayed in the village and rarely came to the prefecture. There were many things here that were full of novelty to them. With these young girls, Li Yi did not have to stay in the shop all the time. He could completely be a shopkeeper who did not have to do anything. When he had time, he would go to the brothel to listen to music. When he was in a better mood, he would accept the invitations of the girls and have a meal with them. They could talk about their dreams in life. Come on, have fun. After all, he had a lot of time. At the entrance of Rui Place, there were already many people waiting. Among these people, there were those who had already placed orders and were here today to collect the goods. There were also those who had specially come to place orders. Fong carried a large bamboo basket on his back. It was filled with the latest batch of Rui necklaces. "The shopkeeper is here." "Shopkeeper, hurry up and open the door. We have been waiting here for a long time. After collecting the goods, I still have to go back and study." When the crowd saw Li Yi and Fong walk over, there was immediately a commotion. "Everyone don't push. Those whose orders say that they will be delivered today, please wait over there for a moment. Those who need to place an order, please come this way." Li Yi could already handle these situations easily. As he spoke, the crowd immediately split into two groups. They consciously lined up and stood in their respective areas. "I say, shopkeeper, can't you bring more goods every day? There are so many people here. How is this enough?" A certain man couldn't help but complain when he realized that his order had been queued up for several days. As soon as his words left his mouth, it immediately resonated with the people around him. "That's right, shopkeeper. The goods every day are really too little. I placed an order 2 days ago and only received it today." "What, 2 days ago? Did you cut the queue?" "I placed an order 7 days ago." Li Yi stretched out his hand and gestured for the crowd to be quiet. He then explained, "Everyone may not know this, but the production process of this Rui Do is quite complicated. We work day and night, but we can only produce a few dozen bottles a day. If we produce more, I'm afraid that the efficacy will decrease." The crowd was obviously very satisfied with this explanation. The Ruidu was a strange item that had never been seen before. It was normal for the production process to be complicated. No wonder it was so expensive to sell it for 1 tael of silver. And this shopkeeper was obviously a merchant with a conscience. In order to not reduce the efficacy of the Ruidu, he was willing to earn so much money. He was really a model for other shops. For a moment, the crowd couldn't help but look at him with respect. After a while, the customer who received the Ruidu left with satisfaction. The crowd who placed the order and could only pick up the goods after a few days were not too dissatisfied. After all, where could they find a shopkeeper who was so considerate to them? It was fine to wait for a few days as long as the quality of the goods was guaranteed. Seeing that there were not many Ruidu left and a thick stack of orders on the counter, Fong couldn't hide the silly smile on his face. He glanced at the door and saw someone coming in, so he hurriedly walked over. "I'm sorry, today's Ruidu is sold out. If you didn't place an order in advance, you can only place an order and pick up the goods after a few days. Are you the shopkeeper here?" The person who came was a young man. He glanced sideways at Fong, and a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes when he saw his clothes. "Didn't you hear the young master asking you a question? Are you the shopkeeper here?" The 2 young men behind the young man glared at Fong when they saw that he didn't speak. Seeing the disdainful expression on the young man's face and the arrogant look of the 2 people behind him, Fong narrowed his eyes. These people didn't come with good intentions. Chapter 116. What are you doing? Fong crossed his arms and stared at them with wide eyes. An invisible force pressed towards them. Since they were not customers and seemed to be here to cause trouble, Fong did not stand on ceremony with them. Putting aside the fact that Fong had a foundation in martial arts, being stared at by such a burly man was very oppressive. Normal people would feel a bit scared if they saw this. Fong's ox-like eyes glared, and a chill suddenly rose in the young man's heart. He couldn't help but take a few steps back. After he came to his senses, he felt a bit angry, but he didn't dare to glare at him. He suddenly raised his voice. "Who is the shopkeeper of Rui Workshop?" Li had actually been paying attention to this side since they entered the door. At this time he stood up and slowly walked over. He looked at the young man indifferently and asked, "What is it? You are the shopkeeper of Rui Workshop?" The young man looked at him with surprise. He didn't think that the famous shopkeeper of Rui Workshop in Qing, a prefectural city, would be such a young scholar. "What is it? Speak." The young man in front of him, from his expression to his attitude, was full of the appearance of a playboy. He didn't look like he was in business. If it wasn't for the principle that those who came were guests, Li wouldn't have bothered with him. "Our young master is looking for you. Of course it's a good thing." The young man didn't say anything. Another young man beside him spoke up. "Our young master will buy the recipe for your Ruidu for 1,000 liang of silver." After the young man finished speaking, a faint smile appeared on the young man's face. He had a card up his sleeve. 1,000 liang of silver. They had probably never seen so much silver in their lives. A mere formula could be sold for 1,000 taels of silver. The young man was waiting for the poor scholar to be deeply grateful to him. Then, he would respectfully hand over the formula of the Ruidu. That way, he would have achieved his goal. Recently, this thing called Ruidu had spread among the social circles of Qing and prefectural cities' young ladies and scholars. Everyone fought to buy it, and it had become a fashion trend. However, the store only supplied a few dozen bottles a day. There were so many scholars and beautiful women in Qing and prefectural city. Most people wanted to buy it but couldn't. After he bought a bottle through various channels, he personally tried it and immediately realized the value it contained. In the summer, it was cool and refreshing, and in the autumn, it repelled mosquitoes and insects. When one was tired, a few drops would immediately refresh one's mind and increase one's vigor. The effects of the Ruidu were just like its name, extremely miraculous. In his opinion, this small shop in Qing and prefectural city was far from enough. If he opened a few more shops, how much profit would he be able to make? If he opened the store in the capital and entered the circle of true nobles, He could already see a mountain of silver floating in front of him. Of course, all of this was under the premise that he could successfully obtain the recipe for Ruidu. However, he was not worried about this. Before he came, he had already investigated the owner of this store. He was a commoner with no background. If the other party was unwilling, he had countless ways to achieve his goal. Fong. As soon as Li Yi spoke, Fong immediately straightened his body. See the guest out. Li Yi said lightly, and turned to walk in the direction of the counter. 1,000 liang of silver for the recipe for Ruidu? Even if this number was increased by 10 times, or 100 times, he still wouldn't agree. Whether it was the Ruidu, or the perfume and spirits that were still in the planning stages, the core technology was alcohol distillation. This was related to his future business. Li Yi couldn't sell distillation. Gentlemen, please? Fong stood in front of the three, and said coldly, 1,000 liang of silver for the recipe for Ruidu? Dream on. Although Fong was a bit stupid, he was not a fool. According to the store's recent income, he could earn 1,000 liang of silver in less than a month. Even if Li Yi agreed to sell the recipe for 1,000 liang of silver, Fong would not agree. The change happened too quickly. The young man couldn't react in time, and his smile froze on his face. Things were a little different from what he had expected. In his previous view, if the other party was not tactful and didn't want to sell the recipe, he could increase the price. He could also accept 2,000 liang of silver. If the other party didn't know what was good for him and brought up his identity, then everything would be settled. But who would have thought that this scholar wouldn't even give him a chance to bring up his identity? He turned hostile like flipping a book. How dare you? Do you know that my master is? A young man beside the young man revealed an angry expression. He had just opened his mouth to say a few words when he was glared at by Fong. Fong didn't care who this guy was. Even if the county magistrate was here, he had to be reasonable. Whoever wanted to rob Fong of his money was his enemy. He clenched his fist and revealed a fierce expression. He said fiercely, "If you don't leave, I will personally send you out." Seeing the burly man in front of them clenching his joints so hard that they made cracking sounds, the three of them turned pale and couldn't help but take a few steps back. The young man raised his head and said coldly, "In this prefecture city, it's best to lower your heads. Otherwise, you won't even know how you die. How dare you threaten me?" A trace of anger appeared on Fong's face. He casually picked up a chair beside him. The young man was about to say something, but he was dragged away by the two young men beside him. Inside the shop, Li looked around for a moment. After a while, he withdrew his gaze and said to Li Yi, "That Ruidu, give me 100 bottles first. I will take them with me when I leave." Last time, he heard from Li Yi that he was going to open a shop in Qing, in prefecture, to sell Ruidu. He was curious for a while about what this Ruidu was. Later, because he was busy with other things, he temporarily forgot about it. Recently, Li Xian had also heard about the Ruidu that was popular in the circle of socialites and scholars. In his heart, he did not believe that the two were the same thing. He heard that it had the effect of repelling mosquitoes. Today, he wanted to buy some to show his filial piety to the princess. Only then did he find that the shopkeeper of the shop was actually Li Yi. 100 bottles? Li Yi glanced at him. Don't even mention 100 bottles. There isn't even a single bottle. Today's Ruidu has already been sold out, and the order list is 7 days later. If you want to get your hands on the Ruidu, you'll have to wait at least 7 days. What's more, Ruidu can only be bought at most 20 bottles at a time. This rule was set by Li Yi. The purpose was to prevent some people from buying a large amount of Ruidu and then reselling it at a high price. 7 days. Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then directly shook his head and said, 7 days is too long. I can't wait that long. He reached out and patted Li Yi on the shoulder. His eyes were bright. Although he did not say anything, the meaning was already very clear. After all, the two of them were friends who went to the brothel together. If he did not even help this little bit, it would be a little too unfriendly. Li Yi sighed and said, "The production process of Ruidu is very complicated. It takes several hours to produce a bottle of Ruidu. What's more, we lack manpower, so it is impossible to produce a large amount. What's so difficult? Can't I find some people from the prince's mansion to help you? Li Xian was stunned for a moment. Then he waved his hand, indicating that this was not a problem at all. Li Yi shook his head. Having manpower is not enough. To produce ruidu, not only do we need to build a workshop, but we also need to buy raw materials, which requires a lot of money. What's more, we can't put all our energy into ruidu. Rui Workshop is about to start releasing perfume and spirits, so we also need manpower. I don't need to trouble you with these things. I'll ask them to speed up the work. In 3 days, we can't gather 100 bottles of ruidu, but there will be 50 bottles. You can send someone to pick it up at that time. Perfume. The expression on Li Xian's face was stunned. What is this? A puzzled expression flashed across his face. He turned to look at Li Yi and murmured, "Spirits, how strong is it?" Li Yi took a small porcelain bottle from the counter and opened the lid. A very strong wine fragrance floated out of the bottle. This was the alcohol obtained after more than 10 times of distillation. Although it had been blended, the alcohol content was still several times higher than the so-called spirits on the market. Good wine. As the wine fragrance entered his nose, an abnormal blush appeared on Li Xian's face. His body swayed, and he grabbed the counter. He looked at Li Yi and said with burning eyes, "I'll help you with the manpower and workshop. You just need to tell me how this spirit is brewed. And, that perfume, what is it?" Li Yi couldn't understand why a person with such a poor alcohol tolerance would be so interested in hard liquor. However, this wasn't important to him. He looked at Li Xian with a smile and said, "How could I let you work for free? Why don't we consider this business a partnership? We'll split the profits 50-50. How about that?" "That's a good idea." Li Xian heard this, and after a moment of daze, he nodded without hesitation. He didn't want to accept other people's kindness for free. He was originally a greedy person, but he would rather give up 50% of the profits. He really didn't misjudge him. Outside the door, the leading man and Fong crossed their wrists to test their strength. Their faces were flushed, and fine beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads. On the contrary, Fong looked calm, and there was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth. In terms of fighting, he might not be able to beat him, but in terms of strength, no one in the whole Willow Leaves village could beat him. His opponent was still far behind. Next to the two of them, the faces of the few men revealed a bit of shock. Their leader was known for his strength, but compared to this big man, it was obvious that he was far from enough. Where did this monster come from? Gulp. At this time, a strong wine fragrance floated out of the shop. Except for Fong, everyone couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Chapter 118. When the young prince Li Xian left with those people, he took 10 bottles of ruidu. Although it was announced that ruidu had long been sold out, there had to be some spares left in the shop. This time, Li Yi simply let him take all of it. After his step-by-step seduction, the final goal was achieved. Li Yi watched as the group left, and the smile on his face brightened. Originally, he had only wanted to start a small business. Under the condition that he wouldn't starve, he wanted to raise the standard of living a little. And at the same time, he wanted to lead Fong and the others into a well-off life. Originally, the Rui Workshop and the Candied Ha's business could satisfy this small wish. However, in the Jianghu, some things were not as simple as they seemed. The business of ruidu was a large cake. There were probably countless people watching from afar, wanting a piece of it. Li Yi was just a commoner. He didn't want to compromise, but he also couldn't fight against the local snake in Qing and Fu. With no other choice, he could only choose to hug a thicker thigh. In Qing and Fu, there was no thigh that was thicker than Ning Wangfu's thigh. If the business wanted to grow, it needed more manpower, resources, and financial resources. It was clearly impossible to rely on just Fong and the others. They could only find others to cooperate with. Cooperating with Ning Wangfu was clearly the most suitable and the best way to solve the problem once and for all. In this small piece of land, no one dared to compete with Ning Wangfu for business. He only needed to contribute the recipe, and then he could sit at home and count the money. Although he was using the curiosity of the young prince, this was a win-win situation. The profits of Rui Du were considerable. Furthermore, Li Yi also planned to work with him for a long time. Ning Wangfu wouldn't lose out, and Li Yi could use this huge umbrella of protection to be a shopkeeper who didn't have to do anything. Of course, after interacting with the young prince a few times, Li Yi also found him to be quite pleasing to the eye. He was one of the few friends he acknowledged. They were all from the old Li family. To some extent, the goodies should be kept within the family. Now that his worries had been resolved, Li Xian went back to make preparations for the manpower, workshop and shop. He could handle such a small matter by himself. In fact, when Li Yi suggested a 50-50 split, he didn't even think about it before agreeing. This caused Li Yi to admire him even more. The young man's thinking was very advanced. Originally, Li Yi wanted to explain to him about intellectual property rights, but now it seemed that there was no need for that. In the following time, he did some small training for the girls. It took a little time to teach them how to write orders. Although the format of the order was fixed, and Li Yi could write it in advance, they had to fill in the delivery date and quantity by themselves. He needed to teach them how to write the number and date. Fang also had something to do. Of course, it was not enough to have only a few girls in the shop. If there were any bad customers or hooligans, Fang had to go out personally and temporarily act as a flower protector. Everyone had their own division of labor, so there was nothing for Li Yi to do. He made a cup of tea and lazily lay in the yard behind the shop. While basking in the sun, he looked for a few books in the library in his mind to recharge. In Jianghu, it was never a burden to have more skills. Maybe they would be useful one day. The position of this yard was facing the sun, and the sun was warm on the body. Li Yi closed his eyes and digested what he had just read. Suddenly everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he saw Fang standing straight in front of him, just blocking the sun. "Son-in-law, someone is looking for you." Fang looked at Li Yi with a strange expression on his face. He wanted to say something but stopped. When Li Yi stood up, Fang added, "It is a beautiful woman." "And I got it." Li Yi nodded and turned to walk into the shop. Recently, there would occasionally be women coming over and asking him to write something on a piece of paper. He had long been used to it. Of course, there were some scholars in the beginning, but after they heard that he had to pay 1 tael of silver to write a word, gradually no one came. Being able to enjoy the treatment of a star also made Li Yi's vanity a little satisfied. However, in Fang's view, it was not like this. "And I got it. What kind of attitude is this? There is a beautiful woman looking for him. Isn't he worried that I will tell the big miss?" A trace of hesitation appeared on Fang's face. After thinking about it, he still followed. Seeing that the young master was so calm, it did not seem like he had a guilty conscience. What if he was thinking too much? Li Yi walked into the shop from the back door. Several girls were practicing what he had just taught them at the counter. In the resting area opposite, a young woman was sitting there with a pretty maid standing behind her. The young woman seemed to be holding something in her hand. At this moment, all her attention was on the paintings around the wall. Fascinated. Seeing the woman from afar, a trace of doubt appeared in Li Yi's eyes. He walked to the woman and asked, "May I know why Miss Zumo is here today?" He did not expect that the person who came here to find him was actually the top artist of the Jade Courtyard. Li Yi and she had some small misunderstandings before, but they had later reconciled. However, the two of them had only met twice at the poetry conference and had no further interaction. "Zumo is here to return the painting to young master." Chapter 119. Fang stared blankly at the portrait on the table. His expression was blank, but his heart was in turmoil. He vaguely felt that he seemed to have accidentally discovered a great secret. Could it be that the son-in-law was still not satisfied with the first miss, and was still thinking about the second miss? In an instant, Fang's heart fell into endless anxiety and confusion. What to do? What to do? Should he tell the first miss, or should he tell the second miss? Since he already knew about this matter, he would be disloyal if he did not report it to the first miss. But betraying the son-in-law would be unjust, and it might even destroy a good family. Old Fong would not be the culprit who would destroy a family. Secretly tell the second miss? Forget it. For the safety of the son-in-law and his own life, it was best to never let the second miss know about this. Fong, who was caught in the choice of loyalty, had a very complicated look in his eyes, and the expression on his face kept changing. Young master. Young master? Zheng Zimo finally noticed that something was wrong with Li Yi's expression, and called out softly with some confusion. Li Yi came back to his senses, and realized that he had made such a big mistake before. A man secretly hiding a woman's portrait. This was very thought-provoking. Fortunately, Rui and Xiaohuan did not see it. Otherwise, they would have thought that he had some improper thoughts about this Miss Zimo. I'm really sorry. After taking the portrait that day, I didn't open it. I didn't think that I had taken the wrong one. However, the portrait is not with me at this time. I will bring it tomorrow and give it to you. Li looked at her and said apologetically, Thank you, young master. Zheng Zimo nodded and said softly. Her eyes swept over the surrounding walls, and she wanted to say something but stopped. Is there anything else, Miss Zimo? Li seemed to have something else to say and asked in confusion. A trace of hesitation appeared on Zheng Zimo's face. And then she said, To be honest, Zimo would like to ask young master what kind of technique you used to make this portrait so lifelike. The person in the painting seems to be walking out of the painting. She didn't dare to look up at Li Yi. She knew that it was a bit abrupt to ask these questions at this moment. Painting techniques were the summarization of a person's experiences over a long period of time. To those who were skilled in the Tao of painting, they were incomparably precious. Even she wouldn't easily teach these things to others. Rashly asking others about these things was truly a bit disrespectful. But she was too curious about this kind of technique. She thought about it all day long, to the point that she couldn't eat or sleep well. If she didn't ask, it would be too painful. Zimo, Miss Zimo, said. This was what she meant by her presumptuous request. For Li Yi, this was really not a troublesome matter. He immediately taught her how to deal with light and shadow, the change of scale, as well as the technique of composition and so on. This was not a secret, nor was it something like alcohol distillation, which he was going to use to eat. There was no confidentiality to speak of. Since Zheng Zimo asked, he could not hide it. Zheng Zimo didn't expect him to agree so easily, as if he didn't care about these things at all. He didn't even say a word of refusal, however. At this moment, she didn't have the time to be surprised. It was the first time for her to hear what Li Yi had said. She silently memorized it all in her heart. These days, she had been studying painting by herself, and she had gained a lot. In fact, many areas were only separated by a thin layer of window paper. Li Yi only needed to give her a few pointers, and she could immediately see through the clouds and see the fog. For a moment, her beautiful eyes were full of splendor. As Li Yi spoke, he began to be a little surprised in his heart. The ability of this Miss Zuamo to accept things was really a little unexpected. Often he just said a sentence, and she could think of the real key point. Thinking back to when he was bored, he taught Xiaohuan how to draw. Under his personal teaching, the little maid still did not make any progress for several days. Comparing the two, the gap was really too big. Fong stood behind Li Yi, watching him and the beautiful woman talking happily. And her heart became more and more complicated. The matter of the second miss had not been resolved yet, and the son-in-law was flirting here. If the first miss saw it, although the first miss was usually gentle, if she was angry it was really scary. Sigh. Things were getting more and more complicated. Fong sighed, and her heart was even more tangled. Thank you, young master, for dispelling my doubts. Zuamo is really grateful. Today's harvest was quite fruitful. Many of the things that Li Yi said were things she had never heard before. It was enough to open up a new school of painting, and all her doubts were solved today. Zheng Zuamo's expression was solemn, and she bowed to him with a serious face. The two were only acquaintances, but he was willing to teach her all these techniques. His breadth of mind was unprecedented. She had received his kindness, and even bowed to him as a disciple was not an exaggeration at all. At this time, thinking of the misunderstanding between the two before, and that she had mistakenly regarded him as a lecher, Zheng Zuamo was extremely regretful. How could such a broad-minded and noble person be a lecher? Miss is too polite. Lee raised his hands with a smile and said, if you have any sisters you are familiar with who also want a 3D portrait, you can have them come to me. 10 liang of silver for one. The price is fair, and I do not cheat anyone. If there are many, you can even get a discount. Just now, Lee was thinking that 3D painting had never appeared in this world before. Perhaps it would be very popular. Which woman did not want to keep their youthful, alluring, and infinitely charming appearance, so that when they grew old and faded, they could have a souvenir? Pointing at the portrait, he boasted to his descendants, back in the day, grandmother was also known as a beauty in Qing'an. Ha! Hearing this, Zhang Zuiamo couldn't help but freeze. A portrait 10 liang of silver? If you feel the price is not right, we can discuss it when the time comes. Li Yi said with a serious expression. If there are still people who want to learn 3D painting, I can also open a class. You only need to pay 20 liang of silver as an entrance fee, and I guarantee that you will be able to learn and master. Li Yi felt that he had found a new way to make money. He could open a training organization in ancient times and hire a few famous scholars as teachers, such as learn poetry from Yang Yanzhou. 30 days crash course on 8-legged essays. XX can teach you to write a good policy paper in 2 months. He could open some classes like this. He even thought of the name of the training organization. It would be called New Oriental, Learning to Cook. Which school was the best in tutoring for scientific exams? Set your sights on New Oriental of Qing'an. Chapter 120. Zhang Zimo left with the little servant girl. When she left, the expression on her pretty face was a bit absent-minded. It seemed that she didn't take his words to heart, which made Li Yi a little disappointed. Women and children's money was the easiest to earn. This was an unchanging truth. If all the girls in the brothel in Qing and prefecture could spend 10 taels of silver to buy a portrait, then he could at least save a few years of hard work. But thinking about it, painting all day was boring. How could it be as carefree as being a shopkeeper who didn't have to do anything? Li thought about it and gave up on this idea. When he was about to go back to the yard to bask in the sun, he turned his head and saw Fong standing there, looking at him with a leisurely gaze. What's wrong? He felt a chill in his heart after being stared at by Fong and asked, who was that girl just now? Fong put away his usual silly smile and asked with a straight face. Although the son-in-law was walking down the wrong path, Fong felt that the son-in-law could still be saved. He had to persuade him not to always associate with these shady women outside. The eldest miss was such a good person. Why didn't he know how to cherish her? Her name is Zhang Zimo, a friend. You wouldn't know her even if I told you, Li Yi said casually. When Zhang Zimo left just now, she ordered a lot of rui nectar from here. She said that she bought it on behalf of the sisters in the Jade Yard. This immediately made her good impression in Li Yi's heart improve a lot. Zhang Zimo? Miss Zimo? Fong's eyes widened and he blurted out, the top artist of the Jade Yard? You know quite a lot. Li looked at Fong with a bit of surprise. That's Miss Hong from the Jade Yard. Fong curled his lips and stopped abruptly after saying half a sentence. He looked back and saw that the 4 girls were still busy over there. Only then did he relax. What's wrong with Miss Hong? Li crossed his arms and looked at him with a teasing expression. What Miss Hong? Fong looked at Li Yi with a puzzled expression. Li Yi looked at him and said, I'm going back to the courtyard. Do you have anything else? Fong hurriedly stepped aside and said, No more, no more. Son-in-law, you go ahead. I'll look after the store. First miss, second miss. Li Yi had just taken 2 steps when Fong suddenly cried out in surprise. Li Yi glanced at him indifferently. Such a childish trick might work on a brat, but if he wanted to trick him, Fong had miscalculated. Sister Rui. A few crisp voices came from the direction of the counter. Li looked back at the girls. Did Fong collude with them? Through the corner of his eyes, Li saw that the portrait of Lu Rui, that he had left on the table at the side and forgot to put away, was picked up by someone. Her pretty face was slightly startled, and an indescribable color flashed in her eyes. Mississippi. Lu's gaze looked over, and with a slight shake, The painting was put away and held in her hand. Son-in-law Uncle Fong. Xiao Huan followed behind Lu Rui and walked in from the outside with a smile. Fong looked at the thing in Lu Rui's hand and then looked at Li Yi. He silently took a small step towards Li Yi's side. If second miss got angry later, he could still block for son-in-law. Fortunately, they had arrived at this moment. If they had arrived a quarter of an hour earlier, they would have seen son-in-law and that Miss Zuamo flirting. Fong alone would not have been able to block the two misses. At this time, Li Yi also had a little fear in his heart. Fortunately, he did not draw a pig's nose or pig's ears for Lu Rui. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fong waited for a long time and did not see any signs of anger from Second Mississippi. The expression on his face was as indifferent as ever, as if nothing had happened just now. While he was feeling curious and surprised, Li Yi had already walked forward and said to Lu Rui in confusion, "Wife, why are you here?" "I have nothing to do, so I came here to have a look." Lu Rui smiled. At this time, Xiao Huan came from behind her and put the food box in her hand on the table. She said, "Miss asked Xiao Huan to make food and bring it over. Son-in-law Uncle Fong's sisters, hurry up and eat while it's hot." The kitchen at the back of the shop could cook, but Li Yi had been busy recently and had not had time to open a meal. Meals were usually settled at the small stalls outside. There was not much food in the small food box. Of course, it was not enough for the girls, plus Li Yi and Fong. So Fong was sent to buy some food from outside. He closed the shop and moved a table in the yard. The sun was warm, and the breeze was not hurried. Such an atmosphere was suitable for eating. The food that Xiao Huan brought were all ordinary home-cooked dishes. When he opened the food box and smelled the aroma, Li Yi knew that this was not made by Xiao Huan. The little maid's cooking skills were only average. Recently, under his deliberate guidance, she had only improved, but it was not to this extent. He secretly glanced at Lu Rui, but did not expose her. If it was not Xiao Huan, he could ignore the otherworldly Mississippi Lu. She was the only one in the family who could make this kind of food. Today, she and Rui came to Rui's workshop together, which surprised Li Yi. Previously, he had mentioned more than once that if she felt bored in the stronghold, she could manage the business of the shop in the prefectural city. However, Lu Rui seemed to have no interest in this, so Li Yi did not mention it again. Today was this considered the lady boss inspecting the shop? When he and Lu Rui got along, there was always a strange tacit understanding. The two of them did not talk about what had happened before. Apart from not having sex, according to their current lifestyle, there was no difference between them and a real husband and wife. They never blushed or quarreled, which was enough to be called a role model. Thinking of the situation when he first came to this world, he was restless in his room, thinking that he could not keep his chastity. Who would have thought that the person who pushed open the door was actually a beautiful woman? She walked in and said a few words to him. Then, she smashed the wooden table to frighten the two with ulterior motives. Before she left, she turned her head and said faintly, "I Lu Rui." These images appeared in his mind. Thinking of the current situation, Li Yi was surprised to find that the distance between the two of them had unknowingly been shortened by too much. Perhaps one day in the future, when he completely accepted and integrated into this world, between him and her, it might be possible. After the meal, the few young girls excitedly talked about the scene of everyone fighting over Rui's clothes in the morning. The little maid interrupted from time to time. Lu Rui listened with a smile. Fong sat beside Li Yi, trembling with fear. He was always on guard against the second miss who could fly into a rage at any time. Chapter 121. Ningguang Fu did not lack manpower, nor did it lack money. For everything, little Prince Li Xian only needed to move his mouth, and the people below would naturally take care of it. However, building the workshop, making the distillation equipment, purchasing the raw materials, and giving the workers in the workshop some simple training. These things could not be completed in a day or two, and required at least a few days of preparation. With sufficient funds and manpower, the production of spirits could also be put on the agenda at the same time. Moreover, Alcohol distillation only had a simple purification process, which was even simpler than the production of ruidu, but the profits could not be compared. This world also had an incomparably long wine culture. From the nobility to the common people, they all treated it as an important drink in their daily lives. The reason why Li Yi did not release spirits until now was because the cost of this thing was too high. After buying a jar of low alcohol content and distilling it, there would not be much left. Distilling a few large jars of wine into a small jar, although the price would be more expensive than the original, but Li Yi currently did not have much wealth and could not afford to burn money like this. Li Xian was not the same. He was stupid but had a lot of money and had a strong background. Even though he was a bit unreliable, but his temperament was still on the same path as Li Yi, and finding him to cooperate with was the most suitable. After eating, Lu Rui did not stay in the shop for long, and left with Xiao Huan and the others. The thing that Fang was worried about did not happen, and Second Miss acted as if nothing had happened. But because of this, his heart was even more perturbed. According to Second Miss's temperament, if she knew that son-in-law actually had improper thoughts about her, son-in-law most likely wouldn't be able to stand here well. But she actually did not have any reaction. Could it be that, between the two of them, there was really some unspeakable secret? Fang felt that he could not continue thinking about it. The implications of this matter were too big, and had already far exceeded the scope of his control. The family matters of son-in-law and eldest miss, it was better to leave it to them. After struggling for a long time, Fang didn't continue to make things difficult for himself. Li Yi didn't know that Fang's thoughts had changed hundreds and thousands of times. It was boring to stay in the yard and bask in the sun all the time. After instructing Fang to look after the shop, he strolled out of the shop slowly. Standing on the street, he heard the faint singing of, "I wish you a long life," thousands of miles apart. Coming from the brothel not far away, Li Yi was stunned and looked over. A moment later, in the brothel next to Rui Square, a young gentleman picked a remote seat and sat down. The singer on the stage was singing Shuidiao Getu in a melodious voice. The young gentleman curled his lips. He could vaguely hear him saying words like, "no authorization and copyright fee." He waved his hand at the shop assistant not far away. "Sir, what do you need?" The waiter hurriedly ran over and asked with a face full of smiles. "Bring a pot of tea." "All right, please wait a moment, the tea will be served soon." The waiter responded, and not long after, the tea was served. Li Yi took a sip of tea. When he looked up again, the singer on the stage had already retreated, and a few women were dancing on the stage. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, and it was a beautiful sight. Many cheers came from the seats below the stage. When they saw the excitement, they took out a few copper coins and threw them on the stage. The copper coins hit the dancers, but they didn't dodge or dodge. It was as if they were already used to it. Li Yi watched the dance on the stage with great interest. This kind of dance that was filled with the beauty of classical elegance was very pleasing to the eye. At least, in his opinion, it was more than 1,000 times better than the so-called South Korean dances of the future, where people showed their navels and thighs on the stage. It was just that the behavior of the audience below was a little vulgar and spoiled the scene. However, in this era, the status of actors and actresses was extremely low. Although many people liked to watch them perform, deep down, they looked down on these actors and actresses. This was different from the celebrities of the future generations. Everyone was an actor. One was so miserable, while the other was like the moon surrounded by stars. If these seniors knew how the actors of the future generations were treated, would they feel gratified, or would they lament? The brothels here were equivalent to the theaters of the future. They mainly performed plays, songs, and dances. It was one of the few places of entertainment for the people living at the bottom of society. Li Yi also came here to watch the songs and dances, listen to the plays, and experience the entertainment activities of the people of this world. In the past, he naturally had no interest in these things. The entertainment activities of the 21st century were very developed. When he was bored, he could choose to watch movies or surf the internet. Unfortunately, there were only a few forms of entertainment in this world, so he could only make do with it. After paying 10 coins at the door, He could stay here for a day and watch as many programs as he wanted. Of course, other expenses had to be calculated separately. There were about 100 seats in the brothels. At this time, most of them were not full. Lee drank a cup of tea for about half an hour. During this time, there were 2 performances of singing and dancing on the stage. One was an opera. The singing and dancing were not bad. Chapter 122. Everyone look, my brother used their Rui Do to become like this. A tall and skinny young man in the crowd pointed angrily at Rui Workshop and said loudly. Beside him, a young man stood there. His face was swollen, and his eyes had become thin slits. One could vaguely make out his human features. My brother heard that the Rui Workshop sells Rui Do that can refresh the mind. He wanted to use some when he was tired from studying. Who would have thought that after using it, he would become like this? The young man's face was full of grief, and his voice was clearly heard by the surrounding crowd. As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding crowd all looked at the young man. Uffed. Someone couldn't help but laugh out loud. This face, it looks like a pig's head, ha ha ha. Ha ha, now that you mention it, it really does look like it. Seeing the young man's swollen head that looked like a pig's head, the crowd automatically ignored what the young man had just said. Even though they knew it was a bit rude, they still couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hearing the laughter around him, the young man's swollen face immediately turned the color of a pig's liver. Ha soy pig's head. At this moment, the people who hadn't laughed earlier finally couldn't help but laugh. The angry young man's expression froze on his face. The development of the situation was completely different from what he had imagined. Shouldn't the crowd be pointing their fingers at Rui Workshop and scolding the black-hearted profiteers for selling shoddy goods and scamming customers? How did it turn out like this? Damn it! Who brought up the topic of soy pig's head just now? The young man's throat moved, and he secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, he gave a few people in the crowd a look. Someone immediately understood what he meant and shouted loudly, "Boycott the profiteers! Boycott Rui Do! Black-hearted merchants, drag them to the officials!" A few abrupt voices came from the crowd, but they were quickly drowned out by the crowd's discussion. I heard that Spring Fragrance Restaurant has a new dish recently. Their soy pig's head is really the best in Qing'an Prefecture. Should we go try it another day? Sai, what's so good about soy pig's head? Braised pig's feet are the best. I think pig's ears are delicious. They're perfect to go with wine. A few people in the crowd looked embarrassed. The young man stood at the entrance of Rui Square and opened his mouth in shock, but he couldn't say a word. The young man's face was flushed red. He looked more like a pig's head that had been soaked in soy sauce. What's going on? Who are you people? What are you doing here? All of a sudden, a powerful voice rang out from the front. Everyone's voices stopped abruptly as they turned to look in the direction of the voice. A tall and sturdy man walked out of the shop. When the young man saw that everyone was no longer discussing the matter of the marinated pig head, he was overjoyed. He quickly wiped away his saliva, and a resentful expression immediately appeared on his face. He pointed at the man and said, "It's all because of your Rui Do that my brother has become like this. Today, you must give us an explanation." What? Old Fong looked at the young man beside the young man, and was also shocked. Whose family is this braised pig head? You. Don't even think about changing the topic. The topic of marinated pig head could not be discussed anymore. The young man pointed at Fong and said loudly, "If you can't give me an explanation today, I'll definitely report you to the authorities. Give us an explanation. We can't let this black-hearted shop go. That's right, we can't let them go." Among the crowd, more and more people began to shout along with them under the uproar of a few voices. Those who were watching a good show could never complain about things getting out of hand. After all, the pig head looked delicious, and it looked miserable. Under the influence of sympathy, the balance in everyone's hearts gradually tilted in their favor. Fong's expression was ugly. If that pig head was really caused by Rui Do, then the matter was serious. It would have a serious impact on Rui Do's voice in the future. Behind him, the pretty faces of a few girls turned pale. They also didn't know how to deal with this matter. Fong, what's the matter? A familiar voice came from the side. Fong turned his head and looked as if he had seen his savior. He was relieved and said hurriedly, "Young master, you came at the right time. He said that there's a problem with our Ruidu." He pointed at the young man and said, "Young master, look." Li looked in the direction where Fong was pointing and was shocked. "This pig head. How did it become like this? Isn't it because of your Ruidu?" The young man pointed at Li Yi and took out a small porcelain bottle from his pocket. It was the bottle of Ruidu and said angrily. Li looked at the young man, and a trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes. Most of the Ruidu was alcohol. For a small number of people who were allergic to alcohol, it was possible for them to have an allergic reaction, but it was impossible for it to become like this. Moreover, when he was selling the Ruidu, he had already made it clear that there shouldn't be such a serious allergic reaction. Could it be that these guys are here to blackmail me? Li looked at the young man thoughtfully. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the crowd. "Make way, make way!" A few constables in black separated the crowd and walked in. The middle-aged constable who led them said loudly, "What's the matter?" A trace of joy appeared on the young man's face when he saw the constable, and he hurriedly walked over and said, "Constable, my brother used the Rui nectar sold in this shop, and now he has become like this. The evidence is conclusive, and these people still want to deny it. Please uphold justice for us, constable." "Hey, how did it become like this?" The young man's appearance also startled the constable. At this moment, the young man secretly gave him a look. The middle-aged constable's expression didn't change. He waved his hand and said, "If you have any grievances, you can talk about it when we return to the county government. Disperse, disperse." Hearing this, Li Yi's eyes slightly narrowed. Generally speaking, for such a small matter, constables would only suggest the two parties to mediate in private. They wouldn't easily bring it up in court. This young man didn't even mention whether he was willing to mediate or not. But the middle-aged constable couldn't wait to bring them back to the county government. Of course, Li Yi wouldn't believe that there wasn't something fishy going on. Moreover, when he saw the two of them secretly exchanging glances, he coincidentally saw it. Hearing that they were going to the county government, Fong's expression changed slightly. The faces of the girls behind him were even paler. At this moment, Li took a step forward and pointed at the young man. He said, "Constable, before we go to the county government, can I ask him a few questions?" "What questions?" "You'll have the chance to ask him when we get to the county government." The middle-aged constable impatiently waved his hand and said to the young constables, "What are you waiting for? Take them all away." A secret smile appeared on the young man's face. Once they arrived at the county government, he would be the one to decide who was right and who was wrong. The burly man and scholar before him were no different from fish on the chopping board. So what if we let him ask? It won't take much time. At this moment, a faint voice came from outside the crowd. Chapter 123. Although the woman's voice was clear and melodious, it was clearly not what the young man liked to hear. "Who said that?" "The constable is speaking. Is it someone you can interrupt?" The young man turned his head with a dissatisfied expression and looked towards the direction of the voice. The light blue constable uniform that the woman wore was slightly different from the other constables. At this moment, she was standing outside the crowd with her arms crossed in front of her chest and a saber hanging from her waist. Her gaze was indifferent as she looked over. The scene that the young man saw when he turned his head had clearly stunned him. However, at this moment, the middle-aged constable's foot was already flying towards him. "Shut up!" The middle-aged constable's foot caused the young man to stagger. When he raised his head, his face was already filled with a flattering smile. He walked in front of the young woman and asked, "Boss, why are you here?" The young man was momentarily stunned by the inexplicable kick. He didn't understand why the middle-aged constable was acting so crazily. Bringing the shopkeeper of the Rui workshop back to the county office had been personally ordered by the county lieutenant. He was only a lowly constable. Why didn't he listen to the county lieutenant's orders? Of course, He didn't know that the middle-aged constable knew better than anyone else that this young lady was someone who even dared to point at the county magistrate and scold him. Furthermore, even after being scolded, the county magistrate didn't even dare to fart. Compared to the county lieutenant, it was obvious that this young lady who hated evil and couldn't tolerate even the slightest bit of sand in her eyes was much more difficult to deal with. The woman didn't pay attention to the middle-aged constable and glanced at Lee as she said indifferently, "What do you want to ask? Ask away." "Thank you, constable." Lee cupped his hands towards her and thought that the young lady of the Lee family was still reasonable. He turned his head to look at the young man whose head was swollen like a pig's and asked, "You said that your pig's head right now is because you used our shop's Rui dew?" Pig's head. The young man didn't expect that this scholar would stab him in the heart as soon as he opened his mouth. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood as he gritted his teeth and said, "Yes." "Do you remember when you bought it?" Lee asked again. 3 days ago." The young man answered without hesitation. In his heart, he rejoiced that he had done his homework before coming here. Otherwise, he wouldn't be stumped by this scholar's questions. "Do we buy it directly or through an order?" "Buy it directly." "What was the price of Rui dew at that time?" 1 tael of silver per bottle." "Who did you buy it from that day?" "You gave it to me personally." "Do you still remember the time?" "Around c. How much silver did the instigator give you today?" 10 taels. The speed at which Lee asked questions became faster and faster. The young man was already prepared and answered smoothly. He was able to answer subconsciously. He mocked Lee in his heart. As early as yesterday, he had begun to prepare for this and had practiced it countless times. There would not be any mistakes. Even if this scholar were to ask another 10 or 8 questions, he would not make any mistakes. Seeing that the scholar had suddenly stopped talking, the young man's lips curled into a smile. He finally gave up. When he turned around, he realized that the crowd around him had quietened down without him noticing. Many of the onlookers began to look at him with a strange expression. The middle-aged constable looked up at the sky, as if there was something in the sky that attracted him. The young man who instructed him to do these things twitched his mouth, and his face was ashen. He thought that he had considered all aspects, but he never thought that he would find such a pig-headed teammate. Seeing the strange expressions of the crowd, the young man was astonished. What was wrong with everyone? "Constable, I have finished my questions." Lee once again cupped his hands at the woman, and then stood quietly at the side. Emmingsa turned to look at him. The indifference in her eyes faded and finally, a strange expression appeared. In her mind, she recalled the process of him solving the silver snatching case, and how he managed to get the truth out of the man's mouth with just a few words. This scholar really did have some ability after all. Ha. At this moment, the crowd could not hold it in any longer and roared with laughter. "This person is too stupid. He confessed so easily. So he was ordered by someone to frame someone else. This young master is really smart. With just a few words, he was able to get the truth out of him." Now that the truth was out, the matter was out of the hands of the young man and the middle-aged constable. With a glance from the young woman, the rest of the constables rushed forward and arrested the young man, and the young man whose head was swollen like a pig's. In the crowd, the expressions of a few figures changed, and they quietly retreated. Even though the middle-aged constable had received the order from the magistrate, he did not dare to do anything at this time. Not to mention that there were so many people watching. Even if his superior was present, he could only act impartially. When he turned to look at Li Fong and the others, he immediately put on a smile and said, "I'm really sorry. I almost fell for these 2 vile people's tricks and caused you to be wronged." Knowing that the constable did not mean what he said, Li did not expose him. He cupped his fists and said a few polite words as he watched the constables escort the 2 people away. "Are you interested in becoming a constable?" The young woman crossed her arms and looked at Li with interest. Although there was no shortage of constables in the Yamen, most of them were good-for-nothings. There was a shortage of smart people like her. If he could have such a smart subordinate, it would save him a lot of trouble when investigating cases. "Be a constable?" Li was stunned for a moment and then shook his head. Although being a constable sounded prestigious, the status of a constable was not high. It could only be considered a temporary job, and the nature of the job was very dangerous. He was not like the young woman in front of him. As a descendant of the royal family, she actually had the interest to be a constable in a small yamen. He did not know if the people above him were out of their minds. Of course, Li was not curious as to whether this princess or princess had the idea of going deep into the grassroots to experience the people's feelings. In any case, he had no interest in being a constable at all. "Are you the shopkeeper of this Rui workshop?" Seeing that Li refused, the young woman did not show any disappointment on her face. She turned to look at the signboard of Rui workshop, threw over a piece of silver, and said, "I've long heard of your Rui dew. I happened to pass by today. Give me a bottle." "I'm sorry, today's Rui dew is sold out." Li regretted giving all the stock to Li Xian just now. He threw the silver back and said, "You don't need the silver. Come and get it tomorrow, when the constable patrols the street." Although Li was not a generous person, he was clear about gratitude and grudges. If she did not give him the chance just now, today's matter might be a little troublesome. It was just a bottle of Rui dew. He was really embarrassed to accept the silver from her. "Well, I'll come again tomorrow." The young woman did not stand on ceremony. After taking back the silver, she waved her hand and said lightly. Then she turned around and disappeared on the street. Li looked at the direction in which she left, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. In the morning, there was someone who wanted to buy the formula of Rui dew by force. Now there were these two people who were stirring up trouble. It was obvious that they were in cahoots with the middle-aged constable. It seemed that more and more people had their eyes on Rui dew. Chapter 124. Brother-in-law. What if the shopkeeper of the Rui Bazaar refuses to hand over the formula for the Rui dew? What should we do? A young man paced back and forth in a side hall on the east side of the yamen of Anchi Prefectural City. He could not help but raise his head and speak to a person sitting in a chair in the hall. A middle-aged man with a gaunt face sat calmly on a wooden armchair, facing the door. He had a dignified expression. He raised his teacup and took a sip before saying, "What's the hurry? Bring them back and lock them up in prison for a few days. Let them starve for 3 to 5 days before bringing them up for questioning." The young man was stunned for a moment before an expression of admiration appeared on his face. His brother-in-law was indeed worthy of being the county magistrate. His methods were ruthless. If an ordinary person were to starve in prison for 3 to 5 days, they would not even have the strength to speak. He reckoned that he would not dare to refuse. At that time, he might even be able to save the 1,000 taels of silver. As he thought about the explosive sales of the Rui dew and the huge profits it would bring him, he could not contain his excitement. Just as he was thinking about this, there was movement at the door. The middle-aged constable walked in with his head lowered. "How is it? Did you bring them back?" The young man asked impatiently when he saw the middle-aged constable. The dignified man sitting in the wooden armchair also slowly put down his teacup and looked over. "Sir, I did bring 2 people back, but..." The middle-aged constable bowed to the county magistrate and recounted what had happened with a bitter expression. "What? Constable Li messed things up?" The young man's face showed a hint of anger when he heard this. He said, "Which Constable Li? Didn't you tell him that this was the county magistrate's order?" The middle-aged constable looked at him without saying a word, but he secretly criticized in his heart. That was Constable Li we were talking about. Even if the county magistrate was involved, what use would it be, let alone a mere county magistrate? "Constable Li?" The middle-aged man stood up from his chair with a serious expression on his face. No one knew what he was thinking about. As the county magistrate of Anchi County, he was in charge of arresting thieves and handling cases. Regardless of whether it was constables or constables, they were only his subordinates. However, Constable Li was an exception. Although he didn't know Arrestor Li's identity, County Magistrate Liu had specifically warned him not to offend Arrestor Li on the first day he arrived at the county government. He couldn't afford to offend her. Before that, He had never heard of any woman who could be a constable. However, even though he was full of doubts, County Magistrate Liu did not reveal more things to him. Since then, he had always turned a blind eye to the behavior of this female constable. Fortunately, although the other party abhorred evil and always intervened whenever he encountered injustice, making the county government prison unprecedentedly lively, other than that, he did not cause much trouble to him. He turned to look at the middle-aged constable and asked with a frown, "Constable Lee knows that innkeeper?" "I don't think so," the middle-aged constable said after giving it some thought. He was very familiar with Constable Lee's meddlesome character. This time, it must have been a coincidence. "Let's talk about this matter later." The middle-aged man thought for a moment before he lightly said. He then lifted his foot and stepped out of the door. "Brother-in-law." The young man chased after him for 2 steps. Seeing him waving his hand impatiently behind him, he finally stopped. A trace of anger appeared on his face. When he received benefits, he was so straightforward, but when he needed him to do something, he always shirked the responsibility. As a county magistrate, he was actually afraid of a constable under his command. If he had known this, he would not have come to this cheap brother-in-law. He held a small porcelain bottle tightly in his hand, and his eyes were burning. No matter what, he was determined to get the formula of Ruidu. After experiencing 2 small twists and turns yesterday, when Li stayed in the shop, he always felt that there were several pairs of eyes staring at him in the dark. Just thinking about it made him uncomfortable. This should be regarded as obsessive-compulsive disorder, which was incurable. He decided that after returning to the stockade village today, he would rest for a few days. When Prince Ning Mansion settled everything, and the shop in the city opened, no one would dare to have any ideas about Ruidu anymore. Of course, with so many orders previously, the Ruidu still had to be opened every day. However, it was only for customers to pick up the goods according to their orders in the morning, and the shop would not continue to sell it. From a certain point of view, this could be considered hunger marketing. When those shops opened in a few days, the young masters and ladies who didn't manage to buy the Ruidu would probably trample the doors of the shops until they broke. Today, there were only him and Fong in the shop. These days, Li was tired of eating outside noodle stalls, so he simply cleaned up the kitchen at the back of the shop and cooked for himself. He bought some eggs and sesame oil. The rice was egg-fried rice, which was simple and convenient. Speaking of which, he had not eaten it for a long time. Although he did not particularly like to eat it before, he still missed it a little at this time. Sitting in the shop, Fong smelled the fragrance coming from the backyard. His throat involuntarily moved twice, and from time to time, he glanced in the direction of the kitchen. The shock in his heart was indescribable. It was not unusual for the men in the stockade to know how to cook, but if this person was the son-in-law, then it was very unusual. Moreover, just smelling the fragrance made him salivate. If his wife had such cooking skills, Fong was afraid that he would wake up every night laughing in his dreams. After a while, Li served the egg-fried rice on 2 plates. Among the white rice grains, the golden eggs were vaguely visible, and the fragrance assailed his nostrils. In this era where cooking was the mainstream, it was the first time that Fong had seen such a legendary dish as egg-fried rice. "Son-in-law, is this edible?" Fong raised his head and looked at Li with some suspicion. Li glanced at him and ignored Fong. He minded his own business and tasted it with a spoon. Although his cooking was not as good as his mother's, it was still not bad. With Li testing the poison first, and not showing any strange expression on his face, Fong immediately felt relieved. He found a small jar of wine from the counter and returned to the dining table. Li raised his head and glanced at him. This guy actually dared to eat egg-fried rice with wine. He did not know if there were others who did this later, but it was definitely unprecedented. Learning from Li, Fong tasted it with a spoon. A satisfied expression immediately appeared on his face. Delicious. It was really F***king delicious. When he went back, he must let his wife learn from him. A woman's cooking was actually not as delicious as the son-in-law's cooking. Even if she did not find it embarrassing, he would feel ashamed for her. With this in mind, When he reached for the jar of wine, a figure walked in from outside. Chapter 125. A woman in a light blue constable uniform walked into the shop. Fang's hand, which was reaching for the wine jar, paused. He was stunned for a moment, and then turned to look at Li Yi. Li Yi was actually waiting for the female constable to take the ruidu. Then he could close the shop and go back to the stockade village. He was thinking that if she didn't come back by the time he finished his meal, he would send someone to send her to the county government office. Now he could save himself the trouble. Putting down the spoon in his hand, he stood up and took out the ruidu that had been prepared for her. When he handed it to her, he subconsciously said politely, "Have you eaten yet, constable? How about having a meal here before you leave?" Whether in the original world or now, this sentence was a very common greeting. Food was the most important thing for people. Whether they could fill their stomachs was related to their survival. It was also the most important issue for people in the ancient times and now. Therefore, when they met, people often asked, "Have you eaten?" Or, "Do you want to have a meal at home?" to show their concern for the other party. Over time, it became a conventional greeting, and gradually became the most common greeting when people met each other. The standard answer to this greeting was, "Thank you, I have eaten." The two exchanged a few more polite words, and then parted. One was enthusiastic, and the other was polite. Both the host and the guests were happy. Li Yi was waiting for the female constable to decline and leave so that he could finish his meal and go home quickly. Seeing that she didn't respond for a long time, he raised his head and saw that she was looking at the egg fried rice on the table. The next moment, she turned to look at him and said lightly, "All right." The smile on Li Yi's face froze. He felt like he had shot himself in the foot. The female constable's unconventional behavior made him unable to react for a moment. He was stunned for a while and then said, "Then have a seat first. I'll go get you some rice." After all, she had done him a favor twice. Li Yi wouldn't be so stingy that he couldn't even afford to treat her to a bowl of egg fried rice. After a short moment of surprise, he turned around and walked towards the direction of the kitchen. The female constable walked to the table and put her knife aside. She sat down casually and looked at the egg fried rice on the plate. A rare look of doubt appeared in her eyes. Ever since she was young, she had tasted delicacies from delicacies to street food. But this was the first time she had seen this kind of food. Just by smelling this unique fragrance, her appetite was aroused. Ever since the female constable sat across from him, old Fang started to feel a little uneasy. One of the reasons was due to her identity, but the other reason was the pressure he felt from her. This female officer was an expert. Old Fang knew very well that he wouldn't be able to defeat someone who could make him feel this way if they were to really fight. Wine. The female constable's beautiful eyes lit up when she saw the wine jar on the table. She reached out and took the wine jar. After opening it, the fragrance of the wine flowed out. A trace of surprise appeared on her face. She picked up the wine jar and took a big gulp. A blush appeared on her pretty face. She wiped the corner of her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim, "Good wine!" When Li walked into the shop with a plate of egg-fried rice, he saw such a scene. It seemed that regardless of gender or alcohol tolerance, the old Li family loved good wine. This female constable was usually like Lu Rui, always with a cold and unapproachable face. After seeing good wine, she immediately changed her attitude. "Where did you buy this wine?" The female constable put down the wine jar and looked up at Li Yi. "I brewed it myself." Li Yi placed the egg-fried rice on the table in front of her, sat back in his seat, and started to eat. The wine she drank just now had been distilled a few times. It should be around 40% alcohol. Fang had a headache for 2 days and hadn't touched wine for a long time. He had only recovered recently. However, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to drink this wine today. Without waiting for the female constable to speak again, he continued, "If you want to buy it, you can wait for a few days. This wine will be sold in the Rui workshop." Hearing this, the female constable didn't ask any more questions. After taking another sip of wine, she put the wine jar beside her and tasted the egg-fried rice. Her beautiful eyes lit up again. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi in surprise. Whether it was the Rui dew, the strong wine, the weird painting on the wall, or the food that she had never seen before, this scholar had a lot of weird things around him. Fong didn't enjoy his meal to his heart's content. He met the female constable who ate for free. The wine that he got from his son-in-law with great difficulty was taken by her, and she had no intention of returning it. The food that was supposed to be for 2 people was divided by her. Fong wasn't full either and felt depressed. He didn't even have the taste of the food. After eating and drinking, the female constable went to patrol the streets as usual. Her alcohol tolerance was not bad. Even Fong couldn't compare to her. She drank all the wine in the small jar, and her expression didn't change. She was supposed to patrol the streets. There might not be a rule in the Jing Kingdom that forbade constables from patrolling the streets after drinking. However, this wasn't something that Li Yi could worry about. After buying some things on the streets, she closed the shop with Fong and rented a horse carriage from a carriage shop not far from the shop. Then, she slowly drove out of the mansion. After returning to the stockade village and passing by the school, Li Yi stood outside the door and listened for a while. Qing was teaching the naughty brats to memorize rules for a disciple. Education had to start from when they were young. Although he didn't know what kind of path they would take in the future, it was worth it to do something for these children after being stared at by so many pairs of admiring eyes for so long, and hearing them call him Mr. from the bottom of their hearts. Rules for a Disciple was the introductory reading material that Li Yi had chosen for the naughty brats. The rhythm was catchy, and the words were easy to read. It was close to the vernacular. While they were learning how to write, they could also learn the principles of how to conduct oneself, as well as all kinds of common sense and etiquette. The naughty brats were still young, so it was important to cultivate good values. In order to prevent them from becoming like their parents when they grew up, they had to be taught these correct values from a young age. In order to make it more interesting, Li Yi made all the original allusions in the rules for a disciple into short stories. Every day, he would let Qing teach a few sentences to the naughty brats. Then he would intersperse them with a few stories, such as getting rid of evil, fighting tigers, and fighting dragons. The naughty brats loved to listen to these kinds of stories, so they would remember them more firmly. Of course, even in this era of feudal orthodoxy, Li still didn't want the naughty brats to grow up to become stupid, loyal, and filial people. What he taught them had been greatly edited and modified to conform to the mainstream Confucian ideology of this era, but it wouldn't severely suppress the naughty brats' nature. After listening for a while outside the school, the naughty brats were all very obedient. When Qing read a sentence, they would read a sentence. The school was orderly, no different from when he was here. Afterwards, he went to the workshop to take a look. The daily demand for Rui dew was not small, but there was a limited amount of manpower in the stockade. Everyone was working against time. Fortunately, this situation wouldn't last for long. In the next 2 days, Li Xian would send someone over to observe and learn the distillation method. After a few days, Ning Wangfu's shop would open for business, and the pressure here would be reduced to the minimum. Chapter 126. In the morning, he sent someone to deliver Rui Lu to the shop, and Li Yi could enjoy his vacation. The weather was good today. It was early autumn, and the leaves had not fallen yet. There was not much of a bleak feeling on the mountain. The shouts of the naughty children filled the gentle grassy slope. As a teacher, Qing was much more responsible than Li Yi. She taught seriously every day. It was rare for the naughty children to have a day of extracurricular activities. They ran happily on a small grassy slope by the stream, revealing their lively nature. Qing stood not far away and smiled as she watched the naughty children. After spending time with them, her impression of the naughty and mischievous children had greatly changed. They now truly looked like a female teacher. Not far away from her, Lu Xiaohu was playing a role-playing game with a group of boys. He liked to play the role of Sun Wukong the most. He brandished a wooden stick with great vigor. The other naughty children watched from the side, their eyes filled with envy. According to the story of Journey to the West, The chubby naughty child who played the role of Buddha was supposed to subdue him and press him under the five-finger mountain. However, when he saw how powerful the stick was, he immediately hid far away and did not dare to get close. Xiaohu, be careful. Don't hit the others. Qin Qing warned him from afar. Lu Xiaohu responded, threw down the stick, and ran away with the naughty children. About 100 feet up the grassy slope, Li Yi had already used a bamboo stick to skewer the meat, brushed it with sauce, and placed it on an iron rack. Below the rack was a burning charcoal fire. The fragrance of roasted meat spread everywhere. Not far away, Fong, who was roasting fish caught from the stream on the fire with a few men, silently swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He decisively handed the fat fish he had just skewered to someone else, ran to Li Yi's side, and sat down. He gave Li Yi a silly smile, and stared at the roasting rack, unwilling to move his eyes away. Further away, the women of the village gathered together and laughed. After a while, Xiaohuan ran over and ran to Li Yi's side. In a soft voice she said, "Young master, the second miss asked if the meat is ready. Let her wait a little longer." Li Yi poked at the charcoal fire with a wooden stick. Haste makes waste. Roasting meat required patience. Mississippi Lu, on the other hand, was free. All she needed to do was to open her mouth. Li Yi himself, on the other hand, had become a free roaster. "Oh," the young maidservant replied. Just as she was about to run over, Lu Xiaohu and a group of naughty children ran over excitedly. Sir. Lu Xiaohu handed over a small white thing in his hand and said, Sir, we just caught a rabbit. Sir, please roast it." When Fong saw the rabbit, his eyes lit up. Rabbit meat was tender and delicious. In the past, when he was a teenager like this, he had secretly roasted it many times. However, there was one time when he accidentally burned his clothes. When he returned home, his parents pressed him down on the Kong bed and gave him a good spanking. Since then, he hadn't eaten it again. Li Yi took the rabbit that was not much bigger than his palm. This rabbit didn't seem to have much meat. Roasting it wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Furthermore, it was such a white and soft little thing. He really couldn't bear to do it. At this time, he felt someone tugging on his sleeve. He turned his head and saw that the young maidservant's eyes were full of pleading. "Young master, don't eat this little rabbit, okay?" Li Yi had never been immune to the young maidservant's coquettish attacks. He stuffed the rabbit into her arms and said, All right. I won't eat it. You can take it and play with it." The young maidservant carried the rabbit away happily. Fong's face revealed a regretful expression. Rabbit meat was really delicious. "Excuse me, where does Li Yi live?" In the Willow Leaf Village, a young and handsome man stopped a villager and asked, "Who are you people?" The man looked at these strangers and asked with a vigilant face. The village was isolated from the outside world. On normal days, outsiders would rarely come here. This young man was dressed luxuriously and had an extraordinary temperament. The men behind him had weapons on their waists. At first glance, one could tell that they were not ordinary people. Why did these people appear in the village? Don't be nervous. I am Li Yi's friend. I have something to discuss with him, the young man said with a smile. The man looked suspiciously at the handsome young man in front of him. Seeing that he didn't seem to have any evil intentions, he pointed to the front and said, "The young master is not at home right now. Walk along this road. After about a quarter of an hour, you will see a small stream. You can find him there." "Thank you." The young man cupped his hands and led the few people to walk in the direction pointed by the man. The man looked at the backs of the few people walking away. He scratched his head and turned to do his own things. Regardless of the purpose of these strangers, they couldn't delay the young master's business. If they didn't have evil intentions, it would be fine. But if they had bad intentions, they would be seeking death in their own territory. "Young master, slow down. A middle-aged fat man followed behind the young man with his forehead full of sweat. After walking such a long mountain road, it was a little hard for him to bear with his physical strength. The fat man's surname was Wang. He was a housekeeper of Ning Wangfu. He single-handedly managed the outside business of the Wangfu. This time, he came with the young master to discuss the cooperation of Rui Lu. This housekeeper Wang had long heard of the Rui Lu that had become popular in Qing, and recently, this was an elegant business and was suitable for Ning Wangfu. He had been thinking about when to ask his superiors if he should intervene in this business. However, he hadn't thought that this young master, who idled around all day and did nothing but work, would also take care of these matters. He immediately had him build a workshop and arrange for people. After a series of orders, the housekeeper was slightly dumbfounded. This was a good thing for the Wangfu. After all, no matter if it was a commoner or a noble, no one would say no to money. Especially when he saw the strong wine that the young master took out. Housekeeper Wang's eyes began to shine. This wasn't strong wine. This was clearly shining silver. However, the workshop was built in the Wangfu. The people were provided by the Wangfu, and the goods were sold by the Wangfu. In the end, the profits had to be split 50-50. In this world, no one dared to do business with Ning Wangfu like this. The young master didn't understand these things, and casually agreed. He turned his head and ordered the servants of the Wangfu to do it. However, as the housekeeper of the Wangfu, he had to maximize the profits of the Wangfu. He couldn't agree to such an absurd method of distribution. The reason why housekeeper Wang insisted on coming this time was because of this matter. He really wanted to see who had the guts to even dare to take advantage of Ning Wangfu. By the stream, Feng didn't know how much saliva he swallowed. Just as he was about to take the first skewer of meat that Li Yi handed over to him, a slender white hand suddenly appeared and snatched the meat skewer before he could. Under Feng's stunned gaze, the handsome young master bit into the meat skewer. There was a surprised expression on his face as he praised, "Delicious." Chapter 127. Feng stared blankly at the handsome young master, eating with his mouth full of oil and a satisfied expression. He felt a burst of anger in his heart and stood up with a whoosh. It was fine that the female constable snatched his wine. After all, the other party's identity was there, and he couldn't beat her. The first batch of meat roasted by the young master was sent to the ladies. Eldest Miss and Second Miss were there, so it was fine for him to wait a little longer. However, even this gigolo dared to snatch the roasted meat that he had been craving for a long time. Feng couldn't stay calm. If this gigolo didn't know the young master, he would have slapped him. At the same time he stood up, the men behind Li Xian also stood up. Their aura was equal to Feng's. However, other than looking at each other affectionately again, they didn't do anything extreme. It wasn't the first time they had dealt with each other. The guards knew that this man wouldn't do anything to the young master. Feng also knew the background of these guys. The reason why he didn't make a move was mainly because the other party had more people, and he was afraid that he would be at a disadvantage. On the other side, seeing that there were a few unfamiliar people who came to the young master's place and seemed to have a conflict with Feng, the men who were roasting fish not far away immediately stood up and walked over quickly. "You guys go over there and wait. Don't spoil the mood." Li Xian waved his hand at the guards and found a clean stone. He sat opposite Li Yi and watched Li Yi turn the iron frame on the charcoal fire. He couldn't help but say, "This roasting method is rare. Even the old royal chefs in the prince's residence can't make it taste as good as this." There was no technical difficulty in roasting meat. Whether the roasted meat tasted good or not mainly depended on the sauce. This was a secret recipe that Li Yi had found after flipping through dozens of cookbooks. Although the taste was slightly reduced because of the lack of a few seasonings, it was still considered a rare delicacy in this world. If you want to eat it, roast it yourself. Li Yi saw that his eyes were fixed on the roasted meat in his hands and handed some to him. Li Xian was actually eager to try. After taking it, he imitated what Li Yi did and brushed a layer of sauce on it. Then, he put the meat skewers on the charcoal fire and slowly turned them. There were light footsteps behind him. Rui walked over and looked at the young man sitting opposite Li Yi. She asked, "Husband, this is..." "Husband." Li Xian raised his head to look at the elegant woman. Beside her was the woman who had been by Li Yi's side in Qing'an Prefecture. She seemed to be his wife's sister. The sisters were so beautiful. She turned to look at Li Yi with an envious expression. This was the blessing of having two wives. TSK. Li Yi stood up and briefly introduced Li Xian to Rui. He only said that Li Xian was from Qing'an Prefecture and was a business partner of his. As for his identity, he didn't reveal it. Hello, madam. Li Xian didn't treat himself as a prince at all. He stood up and bowed with his hands clasped in a very thorough manner. Lu Rui never asked too much about business matters. She just greeted him out of courtesy and walked over to the woman's side. Sun Wukong, I'm calling you. Do you dare to answer? On a grassy slope not far away, a certain mischievous child raised his gourd and shouted. Lu Xiaohu didn't wave his rod again. This time, it was the scene of Sun Wukong teasing the silver-horned king. Li Xian listened with interest. After roasting the meat, he stood up and ate as he walked over to the mischievous child. As he left, he pointed at the fat middle-aged man beside him and said, "Oh right, this is housekeeper Wang. He has always been in charge of our business outside. You can discuss with him how to operate the Rui Du and liquor business." Housekeeper Wang, want some roasted meat? Li put down the things in his hands and looked up at the shrewd-looking fat man. He extended his hand and handed over a roasted meat skewer. No, let's talk about cooperation first. As housekeeper Wang spoke, he smelled the fragrance of the meat and couldn't help but salivate. He subconsciously reached out and took a bite. It's crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It's fragrant and tempting. It's really delicious. At this moment, housekeeper Wang had really forgotten about his business and couldn't help but praise. He was a glutton himself. Normally, he wouldn't be happy without meat. That was why he was so fat. As the housekeeper of the Wang residence, he had eaten many delicacies. In terms of taste, the skewer in his hand could be ranked at the top. After a while, housekeeper Wang threw the skewer to the side and wiped his mouth before speaking again. The Rui Du business. How about another skewer? Looking at the meat skewer that Li Yi handed over, housekeeper Wang swallowed his saliva. He stopped mid-sentence and extended his chubby hand again. With his usual appetite, this little bit was really not enough. After eating a few skewers of roasted meat and drinking 2 bowls of the rice wine that Li Yi brewed, housekeeper Wang sat beside Li Yi and patted his stomach with a satisfied expression. Rubbing his stomach, he said, "We've eaten and drank. Thank you, Li brothers, for your hospitality. Let's talk about doing business together first. The Wang residence will provide manpower, build the workshop and rent the shops. When the time comes, we still have to arrange for people to produce and sell. Isn't it a bit inappropriate to split the profits 50-50? Then what does housekeeper Wang mean?" Li looked at him and asked. 370, housekeeper Wang said after some thought. He had actually been very considerate of Li Yi with this distribution ratio. In the prefectural city, the merchants that worked with Ning Wangfu all saw this giant umbrella of protection. After all, if they could form a relationship with the Wangfu, as long as they followed the rules and did their business in the prefectural city, they wouldn't encounter any trouble. Of course, their investment was also great. The Wangfu wouldn't manage many things, but they would take 70% of the profits. This time, the Wangfu needed to build the workshop, rent the shops and arrange manpower. He only contributed a secret recipe. Only taking 70% of the profits was already very considerate of him. If the other wasn't a friend of the young prince and had treated him to a delicious roasted meat, giving him 20% of the profits was already very generous. 370. Li Yi stilled and then said with an embarrassed expression, "How can I accept that? The Wangfu has done so much. I feel bad for only taking 30% of the profits. How about 40 and 60? Raising his head, he saw Li Yi's righteous expression, as though he was giving up a great profit. Housekeeper Wang was stunned. It was like 10,000 horses galloped through his heart. Chapter 128. Ahem, Li brothers have misunderstood. Housekeeper Wang coughed dryly to hide the awkwardness on his face. Of course, the manor takes 7. All of Ning Wang's businesses outside were managed by housekeeper Wang alone. In Qing'an, he was a person of status. If anyone else dared to speak to him like this, housekeeper Wang would have stormed off in a huff. However, the person in front of him was an exception. The cooperation in the business of Ruidu and hard liquor had already become a foregone conclusion. This was not something that housekeeper Wang could change. After all, this matter was decided by the little prince. He was only a servant in Ningguang Manor. At most, he was a servant with a slightly higher status. He had no right to veto. Furthermore, the profits of these two businesses were so large that they were guaranteed to be profitable. Each year, they could bring in large profits for the manor. If they succeeded, he would have a part of the credit. All he could do was try his best to earn as much profit as possible for the manor. The little prince could not personally ask about these matters. The little prince didn't know anything, so he had to do these things. Housekeeper Wang, you are wrong. Li Yi sighed and looked at him leisurely. Presumably, housekeeper Wang is an understanding person. You should know how much profit the Ruidu and hard liquor can bring once they are mass-produced, right? He could not deny this. Housekeeper Wang nodded and said, Ruidu is indeed a wondrous item. It is popular in Qing'an. If production can be increased, it can even be sold to Jingdo. As for the hard liquor, it is far better than anything else in the wine shop. The profit is immeasurable. Li looked at him and asked with a smile. Then, has housekeeper Wang ever heard of intellectual property? Intellectual property? Confusion appeared on housekeeper Wang's face, and he couldn't help but ask, what is intellectual property? It was not an easy matter to explain what intellectual property was to an antique from hundreds or thousands of years ago. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, although the profit from Ruidu and hard liquor is great, without the recipe for Ruidu and the method to produce the hard liquor, no matter how great the profit, it is just empty talk. Housekeeper Wang cannot deny this? Of course, Steward Wang answered without hesitation. In Butler Wang's opinion, are these two things more important, or are the manpower and workshop more important? Li looked at him and asked. Steward Wang stopped talking. Of course, he understood that it was useless to have the manpower and workshop without the formula. The premise for the prince's mansion to obtain such a huge profit was that the young man in front of him could give them the formula of the Ruidu and the method of producing spirits. But the problem was, would anyone dare to negotiate with the Wang family like this? As it turned out, there really was. For a long time, those merchants had been trying to curry favor with him and establish a relationship with the prince's mansion. Why was everything reversed when it came to him? Housekeeper Wang's expression was a little ugly. It seemed that the other party was determined not to give up any profits. Moreover, regarding this matter, he could not use any means of coercion. After all, the young prince seemed to value him very much. Seeing the displeasure on housekeeper Wang's face, Li opened his mouth again and said, Ruidu and spirits are just the beginning. The perfume and soap that the Rui workshop is about to release will be more profitable than the spirits. Regardless of ancient times or modern times, women's money was the easiest to earn. A small bottle of Ruidu could make them like this. If the perfume and soap were to be released, how crazy would they be? Are you serious? Housekeeper Wang raised his head and looked at Li Yi with a fiery gaze. The profits from the spirits had already made him extremely satisfied. If there was a business that was more profitable than this, it would definitely be a great contribution. Perhaps with these contributions, he could be promoted to the prince's mansion's chief steward in his lifetime and reach the peak of his life. Li Yi looked at housekeeper Wang and smiled without saying a word. Fine, 50% it is. After thinking for a long time, housekeeper Wang finally squeezed out these two words from between his teeth. In the happy and harmonious atmosphere, the two finally decided on the final method of splitting the profits. It was still 50%. However, Li Yi had to guarantee that if there was anything new in the future, he would first consider working with Ning Wangfu. Towards this, Li Yi naturally agreed. With such a thick thigh, would he be stupid not to cling to it? The negotiation ended happily like this. Li Yi's heart relaxed a lot. He looked around and found that there were many people gathered at the grassy slope. He slowly walked over. Housekeeper Wang stood where he was, his emotions complicated. After a long time, he sighed and sat down on the ground. He picked up a few skewers of meat, brushed them with sauce, and began to roast them over the fire. A few steps away from him, the naughty children formed a long line. They clasped their hands behind their backs and shook their heads. One by one, they walked in front of Qing and recited the lessons that the teacher had taught them a few days ago. The rules of the disciples, the teachings of the saints. The first is filial piety. The second is honesty. Love the masses, be kind, and if you have spare energy, learn literature. The endless noises made housekeeper Wang annoyed. After the naughty brats recited it, even he, who was listening at the side, could recite more than 10 sentences. He couldn't help but shake his head and focus his attention on the delicacies in front of him again. On the flat ground under the grassy slope, 2 figures were moving quickly. Previously, he lost to Fong in strength, so the guard leader was not satisfied. Now that he saw him again, he naturally had to get back at him. Of course, he wouldn't be stupid enough to continue to compete with Fong in strength. This time, the two were competing in fist and leg skills. When Li Yi walked to the side of the field, they were still locked in combat. As the guard leader, his skills were naturally not bad. However, Fong wasn't someone to be trifled with. From the looks of it, the two of them wouldn't be able to determine the winner in a short period of time. On the other side, Li Xian was still holding a piece of roasted meat in his hand. His eyes stared at the rabbit in Xiao Huan's arms, and his face revealed an expression of desire. He didn't know how this rabbit would taste when roasted, but from the looks of it, it should taste pretty good. Xiao Huan felt his malicious gaze, and immediately dodged a few steps to the side. "Little servant girl, how about I use this ingot of silver to buy your rabbit?" Li Xian took out a silver ingot, and looked at the little servant girl as he asked. The little maidservant knew that he definitely didn't have good intentions in wanting this rabbit, but money was also very attractive to her. Although the son-in-law would usually buy her anything she wanted, she also wanted to save some money for her own use. As if thinking of something, the little servant girl's face revealed a trace of craftiness. She passed the rabbit to a sister beside her, picked up 2 stones, one big and one small, and held them in her hands. She raised her arms to the same height with her palms facing down, looked at him and said in a soft voice, "If you can guess which stone will fall first after I let go, I will give you the rabbit. If you guess wrong, you have to lose the silver to me." Li Xian was stunned for a moment. Then, he couldn't help but feel that it was a pity. This little girl looked quite clever, but he didn't expect her to be so stupid. Such a simple question, did she even need to guess? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.